Hello, and welcome to this, our 101st live stream. God will provide a lamb. I want to wish everyone here a happy Good Friday. If you are practice Passover, happy Passover, which was on Wednesday. And if you're Eastern Orthodox, well, keep fasting there. You gotta wait till next week. You don't get to celebrate quite just yet. You gotta wait. Keep going though. But anyway, this is a time of year where we celebrate the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and his burial and his atonement for the sins of the world. So, we want to be at least recognize that this is the time of year when Christians do celebrate that. But so anyway, I want to welcome you all here to today's live stream. I'm glad you made it tonight because we understand a lot of people are going to be celebrating services tonight. So with that said, we do very, very much appreciate that you showed up tonight. I do have one little announcement to make, which is a piece of good news. We got good news on this Good Friday, which is that I got my letter from my publisher, and my book, The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context, an Illustrated Journey, has managed to earn out. This is a big deal. Very, very few academic books ever earn out. So this is going to make getting a contract for the next book much, much easier. So I want to thank everyone who's purchased that book. I got the letter yesterday, and this was just so exciting. It was just, wow, it was amazing. And again, I want to appreciate everyone who's purchased the book. It's really helped. It's really helped to push it over the edge. And, I'm thrilled. My publisher's thrilled. And, as I said, in the future, when we do the next book, this is going to make things a ton easier, because I think it's like something like only 10% of academic books ever earn out. So, and usually it's like after 25 years. So it's just like the fact that this did it in less than 3. Fantastic. I mean, this is a great sign to any future publisher that's willing to take a risk on a second book here. So I want to thank everyone who's done that. If you haven't purchased the book, please do so. It's a great book, even if I do say so myself. And well,
POB edition the other day. Take notes in and be able to copy from.
Cool. So anyway, we like every Friday, we're here to take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. And the rules are the same as always, which is super chats have priority. We do take non-super chats. If you do ask a question and it's not a super chat, we do ask that you put a Q and a colon at the beginning of your question. We also ask that you only post the question once, and that if it has to do with the Bible verse or a foreign language, to give me a little context. In the case of a Bible verse, I do need to know the book of the Bible, the chapter, the verse. And if it's about a foreign language, we just ask that you tell me what you think the word means and what language it's in. So just a little context to give me a little, to help speed up the process of me answering your question. So with that said, let's get into the questions. Okay? All right. Our first question here. Let's see here. That's not it. Where is this? Okay, that's it. The first non-super chat here is from Rorik, and he asks, "Why was the Shepherd of Hermas ultimately rejected from the New Testament canon. I've heard some people say it contained heretical teachings, but I haven't looked too far into it myself. Now, from what I best, it is mentioned in some of the early lists of biblical books. I think it's mentioned in the Muratorian canon, but it was also ultimately deemed that it had a spurious authorship. There's some suggestion that it's a rather late book, that it's not just one shepherd, but it's a several generations of shepherds that wrote the book, and there had been doubts about its authorship and its authenticity as early as the 2nd century BC. So it was always one of those books that was sort of, read it as kind of a devotional, kind of like we would read like Pilgrim's Progress today. So it had sort of that sort of connotation, where it was seen as a good book to read, a good devotional setting, but not quite scripture. Even though some churches in the early Christian church did read it alongside of scripture. So it always sort of had that taint of not quite being the same as a book with, say, a single authorship, or at least a well-established authorship. I mean, it's not like, it really isn't quite like even Hebrews, where Hebrews is presumed to be single authorship, even though we don't know who the author is. In the case of the Shepherd Hermas, it was already known it had many authors that were contributing to it. Basically, a whole line of, say, shepherds of Hermas. So I think the multiple authorship issue really did play a huge role in its rejection of the canon. But as far as, say, the rest of it, it also sort of self-disqualified because of its authorship issues. It self-disqualified itself. And anytime a book self-disqualifies, it's almost immediately excluded from the canon. So there's not much you can do about that after that. This is one of the reasons why First Clement was disqualified from the canon, was it disqualified itself. You know, when First Clement says, "Hey, my writings will never be up to par of St. Paul." Okay, if it's not on par with St. Paul, you don't have that apostolic authority, and ergo, you don't have that canonicity. So that's the reason. That's the multiple authorship thing is the real reason that it got disqualified, because it was one sort of it was multiple authors that sort of contributed to the whole of this. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciated. And it's an interesting book. I will admit that Shepherd of Hermas is an interesting book. I have read it a long time ago, but I did read it.
And like so many other books, just because it isn't,
yeah,
doesn't disqualify it as being good wisdom.
Yeah, and as my producer points out, just because it isn't scripture doesn't mean reading it isn't worthwhile. It's definitely worth reading. But it's not on the same par of scripture, and it's just, as long as you understand that it's not on the same par of scripture, hey, you can get wisdom out of it. There's some interesting stuff in there, and it's well worth reading. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. The next question here is from Bonbon. And he asks, what happened around 1350 for the Egyptian language to transition from Middle Egyptian to Late Egyptian? What was the breaking point? Is it the Amarna period? Was this an organic or forced top-down transition? Actually, it wasn't in 1350. Okay? The transition from Middle to Late Egyptian actually happens in the Second Intermediate period. So more around 1550 than 1350. what happened doesn't seem to be anything. It was definitely not forced. It wasn't top down. In fact, amongst royalty, royalty really sort of kept Middle Egyptian alive. It was seen as more the language of refinement, whereas late Egyptian was seen more as slang. But what happened was that there was just this transition in the language as just happens. There's not, and I mean, new movements happen in languages all the time. Just like say modern English, or sorry, Elizabethan English gave way to modern English. Middle Egyptian gave way to late Egyptian. That's just what happens in language. Languages change. They change always. I mean, they always change. I mean, every language is in a constant process of change. So this is one of the reasons I think why. This is one of the reasons why, say, we have that transition during the second intermediate period. Is it's just you do have. I mean, I don't think there's anything we can nail down to a social or political change. It's just something that happened in Egyptian society. And it does seem to have centered around Thebes, is where that sort of starts. We see this, for example, in, say, the Kamosa Stela, where the king's speaking in High Middle Egyptian, but all his underlings are speaking in Late Egyptian. At the same time, too, we also see tombs from the period like Paheri. It's all Late Egyptian, or at least half and half, Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian hybrid. It just seems that the transition is just part of the natural process of the change of languages. But it happens in 1550, not 1350. So you're off by about 200 years here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, or not the super chat, the question. Very much appreciated, but that's about all we know about this. And we have to also recognize, too, that our documentation of the second intermediate period could be better. So there might be a reason ultimately for that change, but we just don't know what it is. But it happened then during the second intermediate period, not the New Kingdom. So thank you very much for the super chat. Or that, I did it again. Thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciated. It's a great question. All right, our third non-super chat here is from Bonbon. And he asks, does the increasing use of images and decreasing use of hieroglyphics indicate decline in literacy during the 18th dynasty and later, increasing scribal errors, for example, Victory Stela? If so, why would that be? Actually, it doesn't. We do find a lot of hieroglyphs, continue to be written, well into dynasties 20, 21, 22, 23. Okay? So it doesn't stop here. We do see a change happening after the Amarna period. Like, for example, domestic images are replaced with, say, images of the divine. So we do see a bit of a piety movement happen after the Amarna period. But literacy itself doesn't seem to decline. Also, the scribal errors happen to be more in line with the sort of literature we're finding after Dynasty 18, which tends to be more what we call student copies. So these are copies of literature that were made by students. So students would take court documents and they would make copies of them in order to learn the language. So those are going, because they're written by students and not by professional scribes, these are going to have a lot more scribal errors than, say, those written by professional scribes. So I don't think there's so much going to be a decline in literacy, but there is going to be, say, a transition to focus. So In fact, if anything, people are still highly literate going all the way to the Ptolemaic period. So I don't think that that's a contention you can make. You can't make this assertion that there's a decline in literacy after Dynasty 18. It's just different. It's just different. That's all. And even once you get into, say, Dynasties 19 and 20, where, say, late Egyptian more dominates, that's not a decline in literacy either. That's a change in the language. So anyway, I think we'll basically wrap this one up here. It's just we just don't see this in the actual scripts, in the actual texts. So anyway, thank you for the question. Very, very much appreciated. And our fourth super chat, non-super chat here, is from Wormius, and he asks, "What resources would you recommend to access ancient texts such as the Marna letters and other ancient works?" Well, you can first of all, you can consult anthologies. There's a lot of anthologies that are translated into English now, like, for example, Ancient Egyptian Literature by Kelly Simpson. That one's very good. You have Lichtheim's 3-volume set. For the Amarna letters, I would recommend Moran's classical translation of the Amarna letters, although there are now new translations if you can get a hold of them. There's actually a lot of really good, if you want, say, to do, say, the pyramid text or the coffin text, you can use Faulkner or Gardner. So there's a lot of different works out there that have translations. Or you can learn Egyptian and go to the original texts themselves. And there's a huge number of publications on this. So that's specifically where I would guide you, say, on the Amarna letters, was to go to Moran. His works on the Amarna letters are the sort of the classic volume here. But you can go to, as I said, there are other newer translations of it as well. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, now we're on to the super chats. Our first super chat here is actually should be that one. Got that one backwards, so just a second here. Okay. Our first super chat is actually from Lion Green for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. And the question is Nimrod an amalgam of Naram-Sin and Sargon? Hard to say. Unfortunately, I have not looked into the whole Nimrod question. I know there are people who've done some work on it. The problem is we don't have a lot of data on this one. So the less data we have, the harder it is to actually say anything definitive about this. You do have guys like Sayce basically saying that it was Sargon of Agade. Okay? But there's other people who have said it's Naram-Sin. I haven't come down on this one yet. I don't have a opinion on this because I have not looked into this issue in any depth. Yeah, but without more data is really speculation. So I don't like actually speculating on this sort of stuff. But we do get this question fairly frequently about Nimrod, and I just have not actually really focused in on what the texts say, what the comparative material is, and all that stuff. So I haven't come down to an opinion on it yet. I just haven't had the time to go into it. So, that's pretty much all I can say at this point without getting into, the fine details of this. But at this point, I would just more or less say, okay, I'm going to just say, don't know yet. But there are other people who have, there are opinions across the map on this one. And that's, again, because we're dealing at this point with a realm of speculation to some extent. A lot of extent, actually. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I know that's not all that helpful, but we don't have a lot here to go on either. So all we really have is the biblical account of who Nimrod was, but correlating that to somebody in the real world, very, very difficult with that text. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Next super chat here is, let me just make sure I didn't mess that up. Okay, that should be fun then. Okay, the next super chat here is from Cosmologium for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, if Moses derives from the Egyptian Emshe, how would you spell that in Egyptian hieroglyphs? Ooh, okay. And are there any books I can read on this connection? No, you can't, unfortunately. The latter question, there's no books on this at the moment. So the only thing I can say about that is it's a subject that's bandied sometimes in amongst scholars. Okay, the whole where does the name Moses come from? And to some great degree, this is speculation. You got a lot of Egyptologists that will say that it's from Mes, but you got others like me who will say it's from Emshe. Okay, there are no books right now that talk about this in any great extent, so that's not something I can really refer to. Now, how would you spell this? That's a whole different matter. Let me see if I can find a blank piece of paper here, and I will happily spell this for you. Okay. Forgive my art skills here. So it's just going to take a moment. Okay. That's how you would spell it. The owl with which is the M character, and then the pool symbol, which is that rectangle shape, and a vertical stroke underneath it. Okay. The M is the preposition meaning from or of, and the shay with a sheen is the it's the letter it's the letter sheen, but it is also with a stroke underneath it. It also means pool, or basically a ceremonial lake. So basically from the water. So that's how you would spell it in hieroglyphs. Okay? So, anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. The next super chat here is from Addison Weir for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you here tonight. When in history does the ancient Near East end? Oh. Well, this is a convention by scholars. Okay? So we have to understand that in some respects, it doesn't really have a terminal point. Generally, though, with the Roman Empire is where sort of that dividing line is between, say, ancient Near East and the classical period of history. So it's for most historians, they will end the ancient Near East sometime during the Roman period. Usually when that particular province is subsumed by the Roman Empire. And at that point, it then changes, or Parthian Empire, whatever, whichever it was. But it's at that point that scholars say, okay, you're no longer in sort of the ancient historical setting now. You're now in the classical setting, the setting where, say, Greek and Latin now starts to dominate. So that's sort of where most historians would place it, is at the end, beginning of the Roman period was where the ancient Near East would end as a historical period. But this is all scholarly convention. There's nothing hard and fast here. So that's sort of where the transition would be. In Egypt, that would be like 31 BC. In Palestine, it would be a little earlier. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It's again, we're talking about scholarly conventions here for history, and that's about it. But the culture itself doesn't radically change that much. It does somewhat, but it's not in the same. We wouldn't exactly see a huge transition in, say, material culture at that time. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. We should get credits for watching these streams. They're so educational. I should get paid like a university professor too to do these streams, but I don't.
We'd all be happy.
We'd all be happy then. I love the sentiment. Love the sentiment. Well, who knows? You never know. I mean, education is rapidly changing. It is rapidly changing. There might come to a point at some time in the not so distant future where people are going to say, hey, okay, you're getting the same education on YouTube as you're getting at a university. We're going to certify certain streams as educational credit. It can happen. It already is. There already are moves in that direction. Well, bad direction or not, it is a direction that certain things are going in. So, yeah, could be. Could be. All right. Next super chat here is from Aston Weir for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Have you ever thought about doing a popcorn review in collaboration with somebody else, for example, a fellow scholar? Yes, I have thought about it. That way you can bounce off each other and make up for any weaknesses, yours or theirs. Well, I have thought about it. It wouldn't actually be for the making up for weaknesses. It's more that you're bringing somebody else into this that has a specialization that would complement your own. Yeah, I have considered it. Haven't had a lot of volunteers, though. So, somebody else would have to be interested in doing it, too. And, fellow scholars are very, very busy people. They're very, very busy people. So, unless you've got a collaborator who has a lot of time on their hands and has a pretty flexible schedule, it's very hard to arrange, really. But I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to collaborations. In fact, I've done a few. So for me, I have no problem doing collaborations. It's just getting them and me in the same room at the same time, really difficult to do. So it isn't so much that I'm opposed to it. It's just that scheduling is just really, really tricky. It's really tricky. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I'd love to do collaborations with others. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I do so many interviews, go onto other people's channels and talk with them. It's what I can do instead of collaborations, really, is because I have no problems with collaborations. It's just the scheduling is just a bear. I mean, I know there's one cast that really, really wants me on their stream, and I just can't do it. I just can't do it because I don't have the free hours that they have. You know, they want to get me in like Wednesday mornings, and I'm never available Wednesday morning. Likewise, I'm free Mondays and Sundays, and they're just not available. So, it's just making that sort of a arrangement of time. It's just going to be really hard when you're talking about academics. So, that's about all I can say about this. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, next super chat here is from Addison Weir. He gives a $4.99 super chat, but retracts the question. Okay, well, don't know what you were going to say, but thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. So, again, thank you very much for the super chat. And then he says, Addison Weir for $4.99 says, "Darn you, Dr. Falk. Now whenever I see an on the right could be, guess what or who I think of? I wonder who you're thinking of. Could be." It's, yeah, Mr. Empty Conjecture is really, you know, you can't forget him. He's become a meme. Something wrong? Okay. All right. Okay. So the next one's here. Okay. Our next one here is from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. When do we see fish ponds and bird cages in ancient Egypt? Ooh, interesting question. We do see fish ponds as early as at least the Middle Kingdom, possibly earlier. Bird cages go all the way back to the Old Kingdom. Okay. The Egyptians were pretty good at domesticating fish and fowl. So they had bird cages and they had fish ponds very early. In fact, we do find reliefs of some villas that have pictures of ponds in them. So we can assume that if they had ponds for just say ceremonial purposes, religious purposes, that they would have also had fish in them, given the way the Nile floods. Interestingly enough, when I was over in Egypt, I took a look at the Nilometer at on Elephantine Island. Now, interestingly enough, that Nilometer is still intact. Now, what is a Nilometer? A Nilometer is a big sort of column. It's a device that has inside of it a flooded area. The Nile rises and falls, and the level in the Nilometer goes up and down. They measure the level of the flooding, and then they determine taxation based on that. Well, I went down into this Nilometer, and there's all this fish in there. Okay, and there's not small fish either. I mean, they're sizable perch in this Nilometer, which was pretty cool. I have a few pictures of photographs of that too. I mean, it's just, and it's not a small amount of fish. A lot of fish were in there. So very interesting to speculate then for their for their sacred pools. And there's a sacred pool that still flooded at Karnak Temple. They're big. I mean, they're really big. I mean, these are not small ponds. These are huge ponds. So, you know, they would be more than able to keep lots of fish in there if that's what they were doing. And we do know that they also, on, say, large estates for nobles, they had big pools. And the purpose of those pools was for catching fish and for raising fish and etc. So we do know that they did this very early, at least as early as the Middle Kingdom in the case of fish ponds, probably even earlier. Bird cages, we find remains of bird cages going back to the Old Kingdom. So, and the birds that they would domesticate in those cages were typically pigeons and ducks, and to some extent geese. Okay. So anyway, I hope that was interesting. I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, the next one here is from Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, how did ancient Near Eastern people view directions? North, east, west, south before the compass. Ooh. Was it the same as today? No. God bless. Well, God bless you also. Oh, this is a fascinating subject right here. Because it's going to depend on the culture. Really is going to depend on the culture. Let's just take, for example, Israel. Okay? They are going to view things, they're going to view north, south, eastern, the compass directions very, very differently than, say, other cultures. Their idea of north is going to curl around the Fertile Crescent. Their idea of south is going to be the desert, basically going into Egypt. They didn't have a west, they had the sea. And then, of course, east, that's into Jordan. Okay. So that's going to be their compass coordinates. It's going to be north, south, east, and the sea. Now, that is sort of, you have to understand with the Israelites, those sort of compass points are going to bend along the Fertile Crescent. So as I said, north's going to bend into Mesopotamia, south is going to bend into Egypt. But with Egypt, it's different. Okay? You're going to have all the sort of your view of geography is going to change with the river. It's all oriented to the river. So, north is going to be downstream. South, that's upstream. So, upstream is your south. West is the land of the dead, the western desert. East is going to be the eastern desert, where the sun rises. So you're going to have the Akhit, which is the sunrise in the east. You're going to have the sunset in the west. And then downstream and upstream. That's how Egypt is going to view coordinates. It's not done by compass. It's done by your orientation to the river. So that's how the Egyptians are going to view it. Now in Mesopotamia, we do have one small map on an ostraca that does seem to have 4 compass coordinates of a north, south, east, and west, even though they don't have a compass. Again, it all seems to be oriented towards the rising and setting of the sun, and to some extent, the movement of the stars. So, all these cultures are going to change, are going to be different as to how it views directions, depending on what it sees in, as far as its cultural geography is concerned. And each country is going to be different. And of course, with the invention of the compass in around 500 AD, that's going to change. The compass, the magnetic compass, is going to standardize a lot of this. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And it's an interesting question. Very, very interesting question. Billy Ningen again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. How do we reconcile sons of God in Job 38:4-7 with John 3:16? Why do scholars translate monogenes as only begotten, but not one of a kind? Okay. That is the whole. Okay, let's talk about the sons of God first. And then we'll get into your second question. The sons of God in Job. Let's pull up our Bible here. Job. $38. 38:4-7. Okay. Verses 4-7. Okay, and Job 38:4-7 says, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know, or who stretched the line of it? Or what were its bases sunk, or laid its cornerstone? Who among the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Okay. So again, we're talking here about a pre-creation sort of deal here, where these were the sons of God. Now, I would take in this particular case the Hyzarian view that this is the divine council, essentially a set of higher divine beings, not as high as God himself, but divine-ish beings that were part of, say, the council that God bounced his decisions off of, more or less. So that would be sort of the context here of Job. Now, in the case of John 3:16, which I could just rattle off by heart, but I won't. It's never helpful. Okay. For God so loved the world that he gave his, this is where the monogenes comes from, his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Okay? So, this is where the meaning of monogenes really is important. Okay? Now, it does mean one of a kind, unique. That is its meaning in Greek. Why is it not translated that way? Tradition. This is a traditional rendering. And this is not the first time I've had to bring this up on the channel. When Bible translators go and start translating passages, it's not just what it means in the original languages that's important. Translators also have to, how do I say this? Keep the peace. There are a lot of people out there that if you translated it according to what the Greek or Hebrew actually says, would get really, really upset. Really, really upset. No translator wants to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. Nobody wants to deal with that whole sort of morass of contradicting a translational tradition. This is why still in our Bibles it's like Yam Suf. It's translated Red Sea when it means Sea of Reeds. It's tradition. And people get really, really upset when you mess with their traditions. Really upset. And if anyone was to mess with the traditional English rendering of this passage, there would be people screaming and crying that this was the translation of the devil, when it's actually reflecting what the Greek really says. Okay? So, voting and petition Dr. Folk to be part of the translation committee. I don't know if I need that kind of trouble. Okay. But anyway, it does mean one of a kind. That is what monogenes means in the Greek. It does not mean only begotten. It only means that by extension. But that's really what it means here. It means it as in that firstborn sense, but as in the unique inheritor. But that's an extension of that one of a kind, that unique, that monogenes. So that's the reason why scholars don't translate it as one of a kind. It's because it would just raise such a stink that the translation committee would never hear the end of it. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. But I also want to make it clear here that the sons of God in Job is when we contrast, say, Job 38:4-7 versus John 3:16, that monogenes really makes this is a unique son of God. This is not like the other sons of God. So that's how we reconcile it, that you got this broad class of sons of God that are just higher angelic beings, and then you got the one and only, the unique, the special, the inheritor. So that's how we reconcile Job 38:4-7 with John 3:16. And as terrible a reason as it is, that's why scholars don't translate monogenes as one of a kind. So anyway, that's the reason. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Billy Ningen for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Could you recommend any books on ancient Near Eastern martial arts? No, I can't, because there aren't any. Okay. Unfortunately, I would love to do a book on say ancient Egyptian martial arts. I'd love to do that book. That'd be a cool book to do. Maybe even revive it too. Because you can identify the moves that are being done on the reliefs, especially at the tombs at Beni Hassan. But unfortunately, there is no book on this right now. The closest you'll get is there are a couple books on ancient Near Eastern warfare. Like Spallinger does a book on ancient Egyptian warfare. I think there's one on ancient Israelite warfare too. I can't remember the name of the author of it. It's done by a very, very famous archaeologist, though. But that would be sort of the limit to what you can do is books on warfare. But none of them actually look at, say, as it from a martial arts tradition. So it's not like what you're going to find in, say, the books that do, say, historical studies of, say, Eastern martial arts. Nobody's done something like that for the ancient Near East, which is really unfortunate because I think there's a lot of fertile material there for that. So, anyway, sorry to break that to you, but that's unfortunately there's no books on this at the moment. Wish there was. I think as I said, I think there's great possibility to do such a book like this. I had done an academic paper on this. Unfortunately, that paper has not been published. So again, I wish there's more we could do. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat here. Very, very much appreciated. Well, I haven't seen it yet, but I'll get to it. Okay, but thank you for the heads up. Okay. Does she? Ah. I don't think I know the answer to that one. I think they stumped me. We'll see though. We'll give it a crack. All right. We have another super chat here from Aston Weir for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsoring my non-super chat. Ooh, Ooh, cheeky. All right. His non-super chat is it true that in ancient Egypt, the word Egyptian was also the word for human? Not really. Okay. You do have the problem is the word for Egyptian. Let's say, for example, Kemet. Kemet is a word that can be used in many ways. It can mean the black land. If it's got the right determinative on it, it can mean an Egyptian person. Okay? But the word for people or human beings would be remech. And remech can refer to Egyptians. It can refer to, say, the Egyptian people in general, the masses. But it can also mean human beings as well. Okay? But it doesn't specifically mean Egyptians. It just means people. And remech can also mean non-Egyptians also. Like whoever was occupying the land, like Semitic peoples or slaves, etc. Nubians are another example of this. So we don't find that idea of a human being as being so extant in, say, Egyptian language as much as the idea of people. So they did say would substitute, they would use, say, remech as being people and Egyptians interchangeably. Okay, they would use that interchangeably. But the word for specifically Egyptians was not often used to refer to humans in general. They were aware that there was a difference, culturally, if nothing else. So it's one of those things that's kind of half true, but not really. So again, it's one of those things that if you press the point and far enough, yeah, it can. It's one of those things where if you take the idea of people and, stretch that to mean Egyptians, yeah, possibly, but it doesn't mean specifically Egyptians. Whereas when it talks about Egyptians specifically, it's only talking about Egyptians. It's not talking about people from other ethnicities. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate, and sponsoring your own question. A little strange, but okay. Alrighty.
If you say, this is a question.
Yeah. Yeah, thumbs up, Asin. That was clever. Oh, well, that's actually a pretty good question. It's not a super chat, but we'll take this one. It's clever. That's a good question. Exegetical apologetics. Given that in the Old Testament, the large years may be genealogical counts of whole clans rather than individuals, how are we to understand Jude 1:14? Good question. Let's bring up Jude 1:14. That is actually a really good question. And what it's going to come down to is wording. Jude 1:14. All right. And the text here says, "And about these also Enoch in the 7th generation from Adam prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones." All right. Now, you've got to look very, very carefully at this. What the text it actually says here, notice here that some of this is in italics. Italics are not in the text. The italics here have been supplied by a translator to make it smoother, to add understanding. What the text actually says here, and about these also Enoch, the 7th from Adam. Seventh what? That's what's missing in the text. It does not say generation. It does not say Ganesh. It does not say anything. It's just the seventh from Adam. Seventh what? Seventh person? Seventh patriarch? Seventh clan? The text doesn't say. Because the text here doesn't say, we have to look at Jude in that sort of ambiguous framework. So, here the idea of whole clans fits really, really neatly. Again, because Jude 1:14 here is not specific as to what that seventh is. So, I hope that helped. It's a great question. It's a wonderful question. I think it's a fabulous question. Maybe even the question of the night, to be honest, because it's a really good question. Okay, the lion question is probably the question of the night. Okay. But this one's good. This one's really good. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Great question. Okay, our next question here is from Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. If Yam Suf is the normal Hebrew word for the entire Red Sea, not really. Why assume the Gulf of Suez is the best candidate? Well, I don't assume the Gulf of Suez is the best candidate. Did the Egyptians call it the Red Sea? No, they didn't. They called the section north of the Gulf of Suez. So and then he asks, did it grow reeds at that time? Okay. What the Egyptians called the Patufi or the Yam Tufi was an area of the Bitter Lakes. Basically, back in that time, the Nile had divided into three branches. The Rosetta, the Damietta, and what was called the Pelusiac branch. Now, the Pelusiac branch no longer exists, but it went eastward all the way into the Sinai, and there was a big estuary there. And those lakes were basically made up what was called the Bitter Lakes. And these were estuaries that were, congested with weeds. It was a freshwater estuary. So that was what they called that. And how we know that is from the geographical lists that were left to us. So, such as the ostraca or the onomastica of Amamope mentioned this. And it was mentioned that it was between P-Ramses and Charu. So we got a very good idea where it was. So it was in that massive estuary there. So that's how we know what the Egyptians were referring to and where they thought it was. So it wasn't the Gulf of Suez, and it certainly wasn't the Red Sea, at least not the Red Sea as we know it today. However, by the time of the Septuagint, the estuary had all dried up. The estuary was already gone by the time of the translation of the Septuagint. So it's at that point that the Septuagint translators are going to translate the Yam Suf into the Red Sea, because that for them is the closest body that they could have conceived it to have been, and that would have been the Gulf of Suez. So, but that assumption of the Gulf of Suez being the Red Sea, that doesn't happen until Hellenistic times. So, and they'd had some small amount of reeds at the edge. Most of those, say, estuaries did, but it wasn't the same as, say, the Sea of Reeds we find at the Pelusiac estuary. These reeds are a little different. They're sort of sitting on the edge of the bank, whereas the ones in the Pelusiac they're congested with papyrus reeds. I mean, they're just full of reeds. You would look and you'd see nothing but reeds for miles. So we do have some descriptions of this of this estuary from Papyrus Anastasi 3. So again, it's going to come down to what did the Egyptians think that this body of water was, and it really does look like that it's in that Pelusiac area, that estuary area. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. But again, it was known for its reeds. In fact, even the Egyptians called it the reeds, the tufi, and that's the loan word that that Hebrew is going to bring into the text when it calls it the Yam Suf. Yam Suf is just the Hebrewization of the Egyptian word tuf. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that answered the question. I'm going to take another non-super chat here because I think we don't have a lot of super chats tonight, so we don't have a huge backlog like we normally do. So we're going to take a few extra non-super chats along the way here. And here's one here from Christo Maoist. And he asks, does the Exodus traditions in the Torah make any hint to the temple of Baal or the priesthood of Baal in Avaris? Not specifically. Okay. But it does. There is some hint of it. Some hint. Where you find the hint of this is actually, it doesn't ever talk about the Temple of Baal or the priesthood of Baal at Avaris. But it does suggest that some members of the fleeing Israelites were priests of that temple. And you see this in the Korah rebellion, where Korah, who has that sort of that nickname of that he's got that Korah means bald, okay? And one of the practices of the priesthood was to shave completely. Shave everything. Your hair, your beard, your mustache, your eyebrows, all the hair's got to go. So Korah was a priest in all likelihood, and he is using an incense spoon. This is a practice done by Egyptian priests. So he is burning incense with a spoon. He's bald. There's that illusion there that he was probably a member of the priesthood of Baal. Never says it explicitly. But there is some allusion to this. It makes a hint of it, even though it doesn't say it explicitly. So anyway, this is another great question. Wanted to take this as we were going along. Thank you for that great question. So again, it doesn't. One of the things we've got to be very cautious of when we look at the Torah is Torah, in some ways, tries to whitewash some of its pagan history. And there's a really good reason why it's trying to do this. It's trying to do this to get the people of Israel to start focusing on Yahweh. The last thing the writer of Torah wants to do is to suggest to the children of Israel, hey, when you were in Egypt, yeah, you were worshiping Baal. Yeah, you can go back to it. They want to sort of expunge that. It's one of the This is one of the reasons why some people in, say, Torah are given Yahwistic names. They're renamed because they don't want to even hint. This is why that, in all likelihood, Moses had a Egyptian name with a theophoric element, but that was removed. And that's removed, again, to expunge that history of pagan worship. Because they don't even want to give any road for the Israelites to go back. The Israelites are already want to go back when they start facing adversity in Sinai. You brought us out into Sinai to die. The last thing they want to do is remind them that they were worshiping in pagan gods in Egypt. And, well, yeah, it seemed so much better when we were in Egypt. Maybe it was because of the gods we worshiped back then. So there is real incentive for them to rewrite that history. It's not to deceive them as much as it is to not give them a reason to fall away. So the writer is not going to talk about the Temple of Baal. It's not going to talk about who they worshipped in Avaris, which was Baal, Resheph, and Astarte. But it does hint at it in certain places, especially among those who were disobedient, like Korah. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, got a $5 super chat here from JP. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are your thoughts about Yehezekiel Kaufman's work on Israelite monotheism? I haven't read it, so I don't have any opinion, unfortunately. Because I have not read it, I can't comment one way or the other. So, unfortunately, I'd have to read it in order to form an opinion on this. And I have not read any of his work. At least, I don't think I have. I might have stumbled across it somewhere, but I just don't remember having read it if I had. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And I'm unfortunately going to have to say I don't know. So anyway, thank you very much for the support of the channel. We really, really appreciate it. $1,000 Clever Boy. Happy Good Friday, everyone. Absolutely. Absolutely. Happy Good Friday. Yeah, I'm not sure Happy Good Friday it is, but it is happy for us.
Well,
I mean, we are the beneficiaries of Good Friday.
yeah. But it's supposed to be solemn.
Well, it is solemn. I mean, but it's also good.
I mean, yeah, we're grateful for salvation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, this was the day he sacrificed.
Yes, this is the day he sacrificed himself. But yes. But his suffering is our healing.
It just seems like it should.
Tandem Toad for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was it Noah's clan and his sons on the ark, thereby having more people than just the 8? That's an interesting question. The Bible affirms that there were 8. Okay? Does it mean there were more than 8? That's a possibility. Possibility we can't... It says there were 8. Were there more than 8? Maybe. It's possible that there were more than 8. The Bible's not always... It's not exactly clear here. It doesn't say only 8. If it did, this would be a whole lot easier question to answer. So we are dealing in some extent to a clan issues here, both Noah's clan and his sons' clans. Okay. There's also some issue too as to who exactly constituted the 8. It's, for example, Noah's wife does not appear to be the mother of his sons. So that's an issue there. Or at least some of his sons. At least not the son of Ham. So there is some possibility that there could be more than 8. I don't want to exclude that because the Bible itself is not clear in excluding that. But just because it doesn't exclude that doesn't mean it is either. And we also aren't exactly sure if Noah's clan, if it was the progenitors, if the progenitor was on the ark himself, or if his clan was the progenitor started the ark and just didn't survive to make it on. We're not sure. But it does seem to me, strike me, that we are talking about the clans of Noah and the clans of his sons. So, could there be more than 8? It's possible. Does the Bible say for sure? No, it doesn't. So with that said, that's about all we can say without really getting into a huge amount of speculation here. But the Bible does say there's 8, and so there's at least 8. Is there more? Could be. Is there less? No. So there's at least 8. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. But again, we're not exactly sure here the mechanics of how that worked. But thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Our next super chat here is from Andrew Tinsley for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Would Israel in the period of the judges have had the scribes able to copy and preserve the law of Moses for hundreds of years prior to organized administration during the monarchy? Oh, yes, absolutely. There were scribes going all the way back hundreds and hundreds of years. Okay? We do know that people were trained as scribes at Avaris. So there was a royal cough there, and a cough is sort of the scribal training school. So that was there, and Moses himself would have probably been instructed at the cough. So because he was instructed at the cough, there would have been others too that would have been part of the scribe class that would have also been part of that scribal training school. So once you got one set of people trained to be scribes, it's only then a matter of teaching that to the next generation. So absolutely, there would have been people at the time of Moses who would have been trained in those skills, who, along with Moses, and I don't think Moses was alone in putting, say, Torah to pen. I think he had amanuensis, and an amanuensis is basically a scribe that works on your behalf. So Moses would dictate, and somebody else would physically write it down. So that's an amanuensis. And there would have been enough scribes walking around Avaris Egypt was an incredibly bureaucratic society. Incredibly bureaucratic. There were lots of scribes. And surely some of them would have traveled with the Israelites when they left Egypt. So they would have been part of the mixed multitude. So knowing that they would have been part of the mixed multitude, they would have easily had the facility to copy and preserve the law of Moses for hundreds of years prior to the organization of the monarchy. Easily. And they would have even had the materials to actually do all that too. They would have been able to create parchment and create inks. All that would have been basic. That's Scribe School 101. That's Scribe School 101. So I think it's well within the means, and who they had amongst. I mean, they had all sorts of people. We have to understand that. We have to kind of. Here's one of the things I kind of rail at sometimes when people talk about the sons of Israel when they left Egypt. That they seem to think that all these people were ignorant goat herders. You know, these people were ignorant goat herders. And that's all they were. Goat herders, maybe they made mud bricks, but that was sort of the limits of their skills. That's always bothered me. Because we have to understand that Avaris was a metropolis. It was a cosmopolitan city. It had lots of different professions working within it. Like, for example, we do find evidence of, say jasper manufacturing there. There were people who created works of art there. We find the remnants of workshops where they did jasper cutting and polishing. And that was part of a larger complex that did like ritual furniture. So, you had people doing all these various different professions within Avaris. You had some who were, as I said, they made furniture, some made cloth and clothing. You had, cobblers who made shoes. You had all these different professions because it was a city. And when you have a city, you have many, many different professions working in that city. You had potters. You had people who grew food. I mean,
because the artists didn't have to grow their own food,
yeah.
they could devote their time.
Because you needed this in order to sustain a city. In order to sustain a city, you have to have people who are, say, devoted to growing food, so that the guys who are making shoes don't have to go out and grow their own food. They're trading their shoes for food. So this is something that always has bothered me, always has bugged me about when they talk about the Israelites. Do they have the skills to do X, Y, Z? To make shoes, to write, to make clothing. Yeah, they had it all. Because it was a big city.
The correct answer is yeah.
So yes, absolutely. I think they had more than the abilities to do this. They had the skills. They had the skills. It would have been part of the culture prior to leaving Avaris. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It did press one of my hot buttons, but I think it's also an important aspect of this to talk about too, is that they had a wide diversity of skills and they passed those skills on. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated.
Sons of might live in Duke.
Oh yeah, that's right. Also, yeah. So yeah, that's also a good, fair point. Is that a huge number of these people were of the mixed multitude, and the mixed multitude were of a variety of different cultures. So they would have had skills also. You had Nubians and Magi and Amorites and native Egyptians going with them also. Libyans. They would have had their own unique skills also. So, so yeah, that's a really important point, that there was a huge number of different cultures thrown into that melting pot that became the Israelites. So yeah, you would actually had a really, really interesting mix of cultures.
Kind of like London.
Yeah, a bit like London. Yeah, exactly. Okie dokie.
Yeah. Next in non-super chat is Melissa's Daughters, When Lions Have Names, which BC sponsored much later down.
Okay.
But you have a 7-year-old staying up.
Okay, well, we do not want to keep a 7-year-old way up at night. Now, this is a sponsored super chat question later on. For a 7-year-old daughter. BC, she says, why do lions have manes? Oh. This is actually a really interesting question for a couple of reasons. There's the general answer, okay? That it is for attracting mates. But manes along lions have differed with the species. Like, for example, the Barbary lion had this great big, massive black mane. Absolutely magnificent. Now, unfortunately, the Barbary lion went extinct. But you look at, say, the African lion, and it's got a very, very gorgeous mane. Okay? But you look at, say, the Indian lion, and there's a subspecies of lion that lives on the Indian subcontinent. It has almost no mane at all. So there is a genetic component to this. We don't know exactly why they have a mane, but we do know that in certain species, the mane does act as a way of getting attention, a way of say, one animal, say, showing off their beauty or prowess or their genetic virility to the opposite species. Like kind of like a peacock. The male peacocks. Beautiful, beautiful feathers. Gorgeous feathers. The peahens, not so pretty. But it's to attract mates, essentially. But that's the reason why lions have manes. Now, interestingly enough, because it is seen, the mane of a lion is seen as the symbol of its strength, symbol of its power. You find this symbolism all through the ancient Near East. You see it on the thrones of kings. Let me see if I can grab a picture here. Just a second. We just take a second here. Just see if I can find it quickly in my book here. I think I have a picture of one of those thrones. Maybe, maybe not. Just a second if I can find it here. Oh, I can find it. All right. Now move this real close to the camera here. This is the throne of King Tut. You will notice right there is the head of a lion on each side of the throne. And down at the feet are the feet of a lion. Okay? So it was a symbol of kingship. All royal thrones across the ancient Near East had the symbols of lions on. Even the throne of Solomon had images of male lions with the full mane on them. So it's a really, really interesting symbol of royalty and kingship. So anyway, I hope that explains why lions have manes. And why the kings of the ancient Near East saw that as a symbol of power. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciate it. And I hope that was worth staying up for. So thank you very much for the question. And thank you for the sponsor of that question also. We'll thank you again later on when we get to it. Okay. Another super chat here from Andrew Tinsley for $5. Thank you very much, super chat. And he asks, follow up on the last question. Is there anywhere else in the ancient Near East where loosely organized societies write and preserve large amounts of literature? Yes, there is. We find it in Egypt, and we also find it in Mesopotamia. Okay? Now, in the case of Mesopotamia, we find it through multiple copies of stories such as Gilgamesh. In the case of, say, Egypt, we find it at, like, for example, the Shabakta stone, which is a big granite piece. It's in the British Museum. It's basically a copy of a papyrus that was an old papyrus that had been found and then basically copied onto the stone to preserve it. While that papyrus is long gone, we have the stone still. So we do know that societies did strive to preserve their literature. Sometimes, again, they went to great lengths to do it, like in Egypt. But also, we also have to understand that this seems to happen in certain periods of time. Like, for example, sometime around, say, the Iron Age, we see that this burst of an attempt to make multiple copies of literature across the ancient Near East. That coincidence? Maybe. But we find the attempts to preserve literature in Egypt coincide with other attempts to preserve literature in Mesopotamia, as well as in the Levant. So, we don't exactly know the reason why that is, but there does seem to be times in these various kingdoms where they go through some extraordinary attempts to keep their culture alive by copying literature. So absolutely, it does happen. It's well recorded, it's well extant in history, and it's not in any ways unique to the Israelites. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, here we have a $20 super sticker from Silly PB. Thank you very much for that super sticker. Very much appreciated. We don't get very many super stickers on this channel. It's fantastic when we get them. We love them. Thank you very much for supporting this channel and supporting the work that we do. Because of the work, because of your help, we're able to continue answering people's questions and just actually having a great time here on Fridays and just really, keeping the work going. And what you do helps put food on our table. That helps us answer more questions. So anyway, thank you so much for that contribution, that super sticker. We really, really appreciate it. Okay, 1000 Clever Boy for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do you think of Herschel Shanks and his Biblical Archaeology Society? Okay, I've got a couple thoughts here. Well, the Biblical Archaeology Society is not really a society. Okay, let's get that right out there. Okay, BS is not really a society. It's a publishing house. Okay, you can't join the BAS. Okay. But you quote join the BAS when you subscribe to Biblical Archaeology Review, which is their journal. They used to have a couple other ones too, but I don't think they operate anymore. But it was a publishing house, essentially. And Herschel Shanks was essentially a popularizer. He tried to popularize the whole field of biblical archaeology. Now, he has not been a figure without controversy. He was the first guy to really promote, say, the James ossuary, which has kind of fallen onto hard times since it was found in the house of a forger. Okay, so that's an issue. But also, Biblical Archaeology Review has published articles from some very, very reputable archaeologists. Okay, so it's one of those things that, yeah, okay, some of the ads in that Biblical Archaeology Review are just scams. They're just scams. At the same time, too, some of the articles are excellent, are really, really good. Now, I've published in Biblical Archaeology Review. So, for me, I don't have any problems with, say, some of the articles. You got guys like Alan Millard, who's published in there. I think Ken Kitchen has. Some very reputable scholars have published in Biblical Archaeology Review. So, I don't have a problem so much with the articles. I would not trust a lot of the people who've posted ads in them. And we have to understand that Herschel Shanks himself is a popularizer. Okay, I'm okay with that. But there's also no Biblical Archaeology Society, really. Anyway, as I said, it's a publishing house. So it's one of those things. It's a popular magazine, but it does feature some really, really good scholarship sometimes too. So again, it's one of those things that it's not a junk publication. It's by no means a junk publication. It's also a publication though that's meant to popularize a subject. So as long as you take it on that terms, fantastic. It's a fine publication in that regard. But it's not peer-reviewed journal either. So keep that in mind as you read it. But for the lay person or even just the interested, enthusiast, I have no problems. I mean, pictures are great in it. Yeah, the pictures are fabulous in Biblical Archaeology. Absolutely fabulous. They go out of their way to make sure it's a really nice, glossy, well-published magazine. So, but it is a magazine. It's not an academic journal. But at the same time, too, some really good scholars have published in it. So, yeah, it's got a lot of us into Biblical Archaeology. So, again, I don't have anything terrible to say about the guy. I do think he does tend to sort of follow the sensation sometimes. And I think that can be a problem. So, anyway, thank you much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Please enter a name. Says awesome live stream. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let's see what's next here. Excuse me. Okay. Excuse me. Allergies. Okay, our next super chat here is from Mouthwash for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Ken Griffith is doing a YouTube series and getting thousands of views. Popcorn candidate. Third video goes into heavy detail about his Egyptian chronology. Oh boy. Yeah. Ooh. Ick. Yeah, may God give me wisdom indeed. It's possible. It's possible. For those who don't know, Ken Griffith is a contributor to a creationist journal. What was it called again? Forget what the name of the journal was at the moment. It's something research journal. And he holds to a revival of Bishop Ussher's chronology. So he's one of these guys who believes in a 6,000-year-old Earth. Really, really terrible stuff. I mean, it's I would not call this guy at all good at doing chronology. Okay, Answers Research Journal. That was it. Thank you, Addison. But yeah, it's just I've read a couple of his articles. I think they're really poorly done. I would not recommend his work ever. Whether or not I popcorn review, that's another matter. We actually have a lot of candidates right now for popcorn reviews. So, but yeah, it's bad. His stuff is really awful. But again, it's all going back to Ussher's chronology. And Usher's chronology is absolutely terrible. I mean, look, it was great when he did it, but a lot of chronology's come a long ways since Bishop Usher. So I don't think it's viable. I don't think it's viable in the slightest anymore. So um, I'll have to look into this, see if it's worthy of doing a popcorn review. But we don't make any of those promises on before it happens. So anyway, that's all I will say about this. Again, big contributor to the Answers Research Journal, Creationist Journal. He's all into Usher. He's into the 6,000-year-old Earth. Yeah, total nonsense. It's total nonsense. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. We got something here from Jack Ray, Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Kiara Folk, please check your email for a thank you for teaching Ancient Egyptian and Biblical History 101. Well, thank you so very much. Let me do a quick check of my email here. Well, we don't publish the email addresses on the stream. Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, and thank you very much, Jack, for that very, very generous donation of $100. Thank you so very much. Very much appreciated. It's very, very generous. Thank you so much for supporting the channel too. We don't generally put out my email address, even though it is tied to that PayPal account, just because we don't want a lot of people getting that email address. But in your case, it's special. So, but anyway, thank you so very much for that generous support. We really appreciate it. We couldn't do this without you. We are grateful and we recognize how generous you've been to our channel, and we so very much appreciate it. So thank you very much. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Jose de Correa for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Has there been any new Bible archaeology discovery? Well, it's not really the time of year for it. Now, we have to understand that archaeology has a season. It has a season. And like everything that's sort of seasonal, there's a time when they're out digging, and that's now. This is the time when people are out in the field, they're digging. And that's usually because the weather's favorable. It's a little cooler. The weather is milder. You don't have to deal with the heat of summer. And it's not dry yet. So you're not going to hear a lot at this time of year. When it comes to conference time in November, when people start to compile all their findings, then you start hearing stuff. It's usually in October, November, even a little bit into December that you start hearing the finds come out. So nothing yet, nothing so far, at least nothing reputable. We did have a announcement earlier in the year that turned out to be not so. It would turn out to be a hoax, or I should say, a fraudulent find, which was the Darius inscription, which turned out to be a fake. But there hasn't been anything really new for the past several months, and we wouldn't expect it because everyone's digging. And if they're digging, they're probably going to wait to really evaluate their finds in a responsible manner, and then go to the conferences and announce this in roughly November. Mid-November is usually when it happens. So, anyway, nothing earth-shaking new. Probably the best find recently was those two Amorite tablets that basically have more or less shown that Hebrew is a direct descendant of the Amorite language. So that was really exciting. And what was really exciting about those tablets was it's the largest piece of the Amoritic language that's been found so far. It also has several vocabulary that had been thought to be distinct to Hebrew. It also was a language manual with a translation in Akkadian. So it was a very, very exciting find on many counts. Do I have a whole video on that? I don't know. I think we did. Yeah, I think we did a whole video on that. So we do have a whole video on those Amorite tablets, but that's probably the most exciting find in recent times. A very, very exciting find. So, yeah, 1000 Clever Boy says Amorite Rosetta Stone. Almost, yeah. Very, very comparable to an Amorite Rosetta Stone. So it was a great find. It was wasn't done in context in C2, which would have been better, but it was confiscated as part of a set of smuggled tablets. So anyway, excellent. It was a wonderful discovery. It's added a lot to our understanding of the Amoritic language and to Hebrew. So very great find. It's probably the best one that's happened recently. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay, please enter a name for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do you think of Kara Cooney's work? Her work on coffins is fantastic. She has a very good work did a lot of really, really good work on coffins. Her political activism work, not so fond of. She's very much into political activism. Oh gee, bordering on wokeness. Well, not bordering, past the border. She said some not so nice things about me, even though she claims not to have known me. We've actually met 3 times. And we've even heard each other's papers. So, it's not that we don't know each other. We do. We've met several times at RC conferences. So, I think, as I said, her work on coffins is fantastic. No question about that. And I give credit where credit is due. The rest of her stuff can be pretty dingbat crazy. So I'm going to leave it at that. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was John the Baptist considered a Nazarene? Was it unusual for Levites to become Nazarenes? Okay, I think you mean Nazarite, not Nazarene. There's a difference between a Nazarene and a Nazarite. Okay? A Nazarene is someone from the area of Nazareth. A Nazarite is somebody who takes a vow, a holy vow, to not cut their hair, not touch anything of the fruit of the vine, to remain ritually pure. That's a Nazarite. Okay? Nazarite vows could either be temporary or lifelong. Depends on the vow. John the Baptist was a Nazarite. Levites could become Nazarites. A person from any tribe could become a Nazarite. Samson was a Nazarite. So, it wasn't unusual for Levites to become Nazarites. However, taking a lifetime vow as a Nazarite was a little more unusual. It happened. It happened. But most of the times, Nazarite vows were considered to be temporary. Okay, so this is why, for example, John the Baptist, he wouldn't have drank wine, eat grapes, wouldn't have cut his hair. This was part and parcel to being a Nazarite. So absolutely, John the Baptist was a Nazarite. But it also wasn't unusual for Levites to become Nazarites as well. It just, Nazarites in general were kind of unusual. But they are something that's accounted for in, say, the Old Testament, and it was a practice that was done from time to time. As I say, usually temporary, but sometimes lifelong, as in the case of John the Baptist, as in the case of Samson. So anyway, I hope that answered your questions. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Daniel Ray for $9.99. Thank you for that super chat. Will there be a children's book featuring Mr. Empty Conjecture? Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, could be. He's a pretty bad influence on adults, though. I don't know if I really want people's children being influenced by him. Very, very bad influence. He's not the most wholesome sock puppet.
He needs a counterpoint at Mr. Epidemic.
Yeah, he needs a different sock puppet to set the record straight. I don't want some parent coming up to me in 20 years ago and said, I gave my kid a Mr. Empty Conjecture book. He went so bad. Question. That would not be good. Mr. Empty Conjecture, challenging authority, asking, leading people down the road of the least likely hypothesis. Getting people into Ancient Aliens. No, I don't think my conscience could bear that. So I don't think there'll be a Mr. Empty Conjecture book. There might be Mr. Empty Conjecture stickers at some point. Maybe a notebook. I think we sell a notebook with Mr. Empty Conjecture on the copy. But a children's book? That might be pressing the matter. And besides, I don't know who would even publish such a thing.
If people buy it, there's someone who will sell it.
Yeah, that's true. If someone will buy it, there will be someone who will sell it. That's for sure. Yikes!
That's not good.
That is not a good thing.
But it would be funny.
It would be funny. It would be hilarious. But I'm just not sure I want that on my conscience. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, here we have the super chat from BC for 5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsoring question from Melissa Butler, very important, which we already took. The one on Lions. Thank you very much for sponsoring that question. We really appreciate that. And I hope you got your money's worth, and I hope that little girl's question was answered. We love questions from children, so for us, we adore it. So we really, really very much appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to take this one here from Silly PB here. How is the progress on the 10 Plagues book? We haven't been able to make much headway on this. First of all, the fact is we did not get the funding we needed to take the sabbatical to actually do the writing of it. So that's been an issue. Okay? Because I do have to do a day job, you need time to write a book. When I wrote the last one, I was basically had a lot of free time. I had enough free time and income that I didn't need to work a day job to write that previous book. Now, with that said, however, the fact that my last book has now earned out does reopen this opportunity, because a publisher is now going to be a lot more receptive to a basically submitting another proposal for a book. So this has been really, really good news that that we are still looking forward to doing this book. We still want to do this book, so we haven't shelved it, but we have had to delay it because, again, the funding's not there. So until I get to a point where I can actually, either do this YouTube thing full time or receive the funding to it, either way will work. Honestly, if I'm able to do, if YouTube's able to support me full time, then yeah, I can have the time to write. If I get external funding to do it, then I don't need to work a day job, and then I can write that way. So there's more ways. There's more than one way I could get this book written. It's just that it does take. You can't do it and do a day job at the same time. It's too difficult. So, with that said, we are still looking at doing this. We still want to do this, and we really appreciate your support in helping us do this. So, thank you very much for that question. Very, very much appreciated. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Luke 3:14 mentions soldiers coming to John and asking what they should do. Were Romans getting baptized? Well, let's look at what Luke 3 says here. Luke chapter 3. Go down to verse 14 here. Start at verse 12 here. And some tax gatherers also came to be baptized and said to him, Teacher, what shall we do? And he said to them, Collect no more than what you've been ordered to do. And some soldiers were questioning him, saying, And what about us? What shall we do? And he said, Do not take money from anyone by force, or accuse anyone falsely, and be content with your wages. Now, while the people were in a state of expectation and were all wondering in their hearts about John as to whether he might be the Christ. Okay. So, I think yes. We do know that some Romans did convert to Judaism, at least first century Judaism. But not just them, others as well, like tax collectors, scribes. There was a variety of people that were converting to basically the local Israelite religion at the time. So yeah, some of them were getting baptized. Some of them were asking John, how shall we live? And these are great questions if you want to, if you are, converting to a new religion, yeah, those are great questions to ask. You should be asking those questions. So yes, some Romans were being baptized by John. Some tax collectors were being baptized by John. So that's definitely a yes. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. All right, BC again for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Luke 4:2. Was Christ tempted for 40 days or only tempted at the end of 40 days? Significant that he always uses scripture to rebuke the devil. Well, okay, let's bring up Luke chapter 4. And this is the temptation of Christ in the wilderness. Start at verse 1 here. And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led out by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing during those days, and when they had ended, he became hungry. Right now, I'm going to just see what the Greek says here. In the accusative. Present participle. Masculine. Okay. It sounds like, at least from the Greek here, that it was the process of temptation. So what we have here is it's not at the end of 40 days, but through the 40 days. Okay. The 4 in verse 2 is not actually is not represented by a preposition. It does look like it's more of an accusative 40 days. So it's the object of the sentence here. So it's more along the lines of he was led by the Spirit in the wilderness 40 days. Being tempted, and there's that participle there, being tempted by the devil. So there's an ongoing action there. And it's not that this is just one thing here, that this is an ongoing process of temptation over that 40 days. So the fact is that it's not at the end of the 40 alone. It's throughout the 40. Now, as far as your second question, the significance that he always uses Scripture to rebuke the devil, that's because the devil is using Scripture. This is a context of exegesis. They're both the devil and Christ are using Scripture here as their source of authority. You know, the devil says, if you are the Son of God, tell the stone to become bread. Okay. And Jesus answers him, is it written, man shall not live on bread alone. And then we get down to verse 9 here, where it says, and he led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself here, for it is written, he will give angels charge concerning you to guard you. The devil here is quoting Scripture, but he's taking it out of its context. And then he continues, verse 11, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. And then Jesus replies, using a text in its proper context in verse 12. And Jesus answers and said to him, it is said, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Verse 13, and when the devil had finished every temptation, he departed from him until an opportune time. Okay, so they are actually both going at it here. You know, the devil is doing multiple tests, multiple times, and trying to wear Christ down. Trying to wear him down, and he's using Scripture as his authority to do so. Now, scripture taken out of context, but scripture nonetheless. And Jesus replies with scripture. So it's significant that both parties here are using scripture, just using it in different ways. And I think this is one of those things that we have to be very careful of when we ourselves do stuff like proof texting. You know, we have to be careful when we do teach from the Bible that we don't take things out of their context to try to prove what we want to prove. Because, that's what the devil does in Luke 4 here, is he's taking scripture out of its context to get Christ to do what he wants him to do for his purposes. So I think it's an important lesson that we can learn here just by that interaction between the devil and Christ and how each one is treating scripture. Devil's using it for his ends, his goals. Christ is using it for the goals of the Father. So I think that's a very, very important distinction here that we make. And I think this is really a something we can learn from this text and apply to our own lives as well. So anyway, I hope that answers your questions. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Mr. Rich B.O.B., $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Where would the Reed Sea in 1 Kings 9:26 refer to? Okay. There is more than one Reed Sea. Okay. We'll pull this one up and we'll should talk about this one specifically here. This is 1 Kings 9 verse 6. No, 9:26, sorry. Okay. Yeah, this is talking about King Solomon's. All right, and King Solomon also built a fleet of ships in Ezion Geber, which is near Eloth, on the shore of the Reed Sea in the land of Edom. Now, this is talking about, it's not, one of the things we have to keep in mind here is the Hebrew here is not the Red Sea. It just says Red Sea. Okay, so there's not that definiteness here. At least I don't think there is. I better best make sure of that here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't have the definite article here. Yam Suf in the land of Edom. Okay. Okay. So what we have here is multiple locations with similar sounding names. Yam Suf, Sea of Reeds. Okay. It's not just one sea. Several locations have had that name. The two that we find in the Bible here are the one by the Pelusiac branch of the Nile. That's where the Exodus takes place. But then we got this second one here, near what's modern day Eilat. This one here is in the Gulf of Aqaba, on the northern point of the Gulf of Aqaba. And in ancient times, it was called Ezion Geber. Okay, so that's what's being talked about here, is the one on the northernmost point of the Gulf of Aqaba. Now, it didn't get this name till quite a bit after basically the crossings incident. But at the same time, too, we do know that there are multiple Sea of Reeds. But this one is identified as being in the land of Edom. And we do know where Edom was, which is it's in the southern point of the Levant. It does stretch from, say, Eilat up into the Negev and Arabah. So It's part of that northern portion of Canaan, or sorry, the southern portion of Canaan. The southern portion of Canaan, um, sort of you can draw sort of a straight line from Gaza eastward, and then you get into at that point Edom at that point. So um, so that's what you're going to find there. So that's really what's talking about. It's in. I wish I had a map that I could pull up here and I could just point to it. But it's as I said, really close to modern day Eilat in Israel. So that would be where that fleet would have been situated, and it's really close to Edom, to the country of Edom. And at some points in time, the Edomites would have had control of that region. So that's the Reed Sea that's referred to here in 1 Kings 9:26, and it's a different Reed Sea than we find at the beginning of the book of Exodus.
You see the camel leopards? Take a left at the Reed Sea.
Yeah, yeah. That's a problem with sometimes with these. There's sometimes more than one place with the same name, and we just have to accept that in ancient geography. Like Kadesh, there's more than one Kadesh. There's Kadesh in Edom. There's also Kadesh near Gaza. That's Kadesh Barnea. There's more than one Kadesh. That's something you just have to accept about ancient geography. So that just happens. So you have to accept that as you look at when you start doing these. You'll start looking at biblical geography. Multiple places can have the same name. Yeah, like how many Springfields are there in the United States? Too many. Like almost one per state. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate it. I hope that answered the question. Take a left by the Reed Sea. Which one? That one. Yeah, pretty much. If you reach the pyramids, you've gone too far. Yep. For sure. Okay. That was fun. Okay, where are we? Where do we leave off here? All right, here we go. JP for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Differences between Israelite versus Egyptian warfare. Yeah, there were several. First of all, when we talk about most of Israelite warfare, you're starting to more Israelite warfare was Iron Age warfare than, say, Egyptian. Egyptian clung on to the Bronze Age much, much longer than other civilizations. So they tended to use bronze weapons more, whereas Israelites tend to made that shift to iron weapons pretty quickly at least into the United Monarchy. Egyptians also had different materials that they made their stuff out of. The Egyptian, for example, the Egyptian chariots were essentially light, fast, mobile archery platforms. They were meant for desert warfare. They were really designed for desert warfare. That didn't prevent them from using them in Israel, but they weren't specifically designed for warfare in Israel. A lot of Egyptians used javelins, arrows, and a lot of Egyptian arrows still had stone points up until at least the late period. Whereas Israelites tended to gravitate to iron arrowheads very, very quickly. So the transitions between materials of warfare were different between the two cultures. The Israelite chariot was heavier. It was a heavier deal. Uh, Israel also, especially the northern kingdom of Israel, actually made a um, exported chariots. Would actually manufacture and export chariots to the Hittites. So they were also an exporter of weapons, whereas the Egyptians tended not to export their equipment. So there was actually a lot of differences between the two. Um, Bonbon asks, weren't iron weapons weaker than bronze weapons though? No, they weren't. No. Bronze weapons were very weak. Part of the reason why bronze weapons were so weak was because they had to be they were work hardened. It was also a matter of momentum too. Bronze is a lighter metal than iron, so iron could get greater penetration with an arrowhead. The thing is with a iron arrowhead, you could actually smash bones if you aim it and hit it right. So I mean, you could create some very very nasty wounds with iron, with iron arrowheads. So um, iron was definitely the superior material for warfare. Definitely the superior material. You could also make much longer swords, much stronger swords, stronger armor. Yeah, so it was actually much much superior to use iron over. And we have to kind of understand too that when we talk about iron of that period too, it wasn't pig iron. Okay, it's not quite pig iron. It's more like a very mild steel. Okay, so it could be hardened. So we have to keep that in mind. Like even say copper alloy that say Egyptians use wasn't really pure copper. It was arsenic bronze. It was a naturally occurring form of bronze. So likewise, in the smelting process for iron, some carbon naturally got worked in. Some carbon actually got worked into the iron through their smelting process. Their smelting process wasn't clean. Okay, that actually led to a kind of mild steel. So that made it really really suitable for warfare. So they had ways of working the carbon into it, even if it was just by accident. So even though a lot of them didn't understand why it came out this way, it certainly did. So, so those are some of the differences between Israelite and Egyptian warfare. Anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Just by there. Okay, the Camelopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. How often does God speak to us through dreams? That's an impossible question to answer. Sometimes. Sometimes. How can one discern a God sent dream from a regular one? With great difficulty. I've been having dreams with similar themes. Maybe. It's impossible really to tell if it's a dream from God or if it's something else. Okay. Uh, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. But if it is from God, He will reveal it to you. He'll reveal that it is from Him. That's about all we can say. Is there's no codified means of interpreting, say, if a dream is from God. However, it is consistent with Scripture. It's more likely to be from. If it's inconsistent with Holy Scripture, then it's not from God. That much you can be sure. Okay? So if it's not consistent with Scripture, you can rule it out as being from God. If it is consistent, then it's open, whether or not it is from God or not. And then you have to rely on discernment. And discernment sometimes takes time. But eventually God will reveal whether it's from him or not. And that's unfortunately all we can say about that. We know God does sometimes speak through dreams. He doesn't do it often, but it has happened. And there are people who have still report that this happens. So it's not something that ever went away. It's just not something that happens very often. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And it's a tricky subject. It's a tricky subject because we can't be sure.
But the bottom line is if it disagrees with scripture.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Pentecostals gathering rabbit that you can say, no, this is.
The bottom line, as my producer points out, is if it does disagree with scripture, then that's it. Then you can rule it out. And you have to be careful because you have to have that discernment to know that it disagrees with scripture. So if it disagrees with scripture, absolutely. Dream interpretation, however, is part of, say, biblical prognostication. We see it several times in the Bible. We see it in Joseph. We see it with Daniel. So, again, if it's from God, God will reveal that it's from him. If it isn't, then if it contradicts scripture, rule it out. Pray. Yeah, pray. Ask God for discernment. If you pray for discernment, God will provide it. That much is true. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. It's an interesting question. It's a difficult one, though. It's a difficult one. Okay. Clever Boy, 1000 Clever Boy for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. For Addison's Weir's question, just above. Ooh. Okay. And Addison asks, were the numbers given for the reigns in the Sumerian king list taken literally? Okay. Now, there's two sets of numbers. Okay. Some of them can, some of them cannot be taken literally. For example, we do find, like in later on in the list, the numbers of the reigns are very, very sensible. 28 years, 13 years, 5 years, etc. Okay. The early reigns is where things get weird. And they do seem to follow a certain pattern. They do fall like for example, 28,000 years. Or 12,500 years. And they're not random numbers. They're definitely not random numbers. But we also don't know exactly what they mean either. So I don't. It's hard to know if they took them literally, but it also coincides with a certain fact that we find in Mesopotamian history, which is, say, the discovery of the solar year. Now, in Egypt, the solar year was determined by the rise and fall of the river. And the Egyptians knew about the solar year going way back into pre-dynastic times. But in Mesopotamia, that doesn't seem to happen until, what was it now? Let me just do a quick check here. Was it Dynasty 2? Do a quick. That's not what I wanted. Look this up quickly here, so. Yeah, second dynasty of Uruk is when Mesopotamia discovers the solar year. Okay? And it's before then that you see those Sumerian king lists have these exaggerated years. So, as I said, we don't know why they did this, but it doesn't seem that before Uruk, the second dynasty of Uruk, that Sumerians kept track of things in, say, the reign of their kings in terms of years. So, uh, so with that said, we don't know why they exaggerated it exactly, as opposed to just omitting the counts, or they just didn't count them because they didn't have a year yet. But that seems to be when sort of the counting of royal reigns begins in Mesopotamia, is at that period of Uruk Dynasty 2. So, with that said, we don't know exactly the reason. Were they just exaggerated? Was this just a placeholder? Don't know. Did they regard that as literal? Well, probably not so much. But you never know. You never know for sure. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. And thanks to 1000 Cleverboy for sponsoring that question. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you so very much. Okay. Okay. Johan Snyman for 35 South African. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. Does Genesis 1:26 and Genesis 2:7 indicate two separate creations of humans? If not, how is that determined? Asking for a friend. Okay. Pull up our Bible here. Genesis. Genesis 1:26. All right, and verse 26 says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Okay? And then you have, of course, chapter 2, verse 7. Then the Lord formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. All right. Now, what we have here is two pericopes that are doing two different things, but I don't think they're two separate creations of humanity. Okay? Now, lots of scholars will disagree with me here. Some will agree with me. Again, scholars tend to be, some scholars, especially those who believe in the documentary hypothesis, will believe that this is two separate accounts. Okay? I don't buy that. What I think we have here is the general account in chapter 1, where it's setting out the order of creation as a temple property. And then you have in chapter 2 a snapshot, a excerpt, as it were, of what's happening in chapter 1. Specifically, what's happening in God's holiest space, in the Holy of Holies. Eden is set up apart from the rest of the earth to be a holy place, a Holy of Holies, within the greater temple of the earth. Okay? So, when taken in that more ritual light, what we're seeing here is not two separate creation accounts, but one, say, general account of, say, the turning of the cosmos into God's ritual space, versus, say, in chapter 2, God taking Eden and making that his Holy of Holies within that ritual space. So the two are complementary, They're not two separate creation accounts. Okay? Because it doesn't really go over every creation account again and again. It just basically is taking a snapshot of what happened in chapter 1. Even the whole sort of narrative here, where you look at, say, the beginning of chapter 2, which is actually the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and earth were created and all their hosts. That's the conclusion of chapter 1. And by the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work that he had created and made. Verse 4. This is the account of heavens and earth when they were created in the day the Lord made them. Okay, so now you get the focus. Now you get the snapshot. So even the structure of Genesis 1 and 2 lends to that interpretation. So I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat, and that's how we determine it. So I hope that was useful. Thank you so much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $2. Sponsor Christo Mouse question about ball from 9:44 p.m. Pacific time. Actually, we did cover that question. It's like, because I remember I thought that was such a great question. I pulled that one out already. Okay. Wow. Well, thank you for sponsoring it. But we didn't see this prior to taking that question. I just thought that was a super interesting question. So anyway, we already answered that question, so I want to thank you very much for the sponsor of it. And it was a really good question. So that was fantastic, and we do appreciate you sponsoring it. So thank you so much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate it. Okay. VLN for $7 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. I just wanted to say what a pleasure it is to hear you talk and learn from you, dear Professor Blessed. Well, bless you also. And thank you very much for that super chat. We really appreciate the financial support. We also appreciate all the prayers that we've received. We couldn't do this without your prayer support. We thank everyone for doing this. So thank you so much. It is a great pleasure to be able to come here every Friday and to serve our community by, answering their questions. And by the way, if you haven't already, please consider joining us on our Discord server, where we don't answer questions on the Discord server, but we do socialize there. So we love coming here every Friday, and I'm glad you're learning. So thank you so much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate it. Okay, 1,000 Clever Boy, $2. Since other question right above. Okay. Let's see, what was that? Okay. Addison asks, what's the most recent archaeological find that has confirmed one aspect of the Bible? Ooh. Most recent. That one is probably my favorite one is the Jerubbaal ostraca. And what I like about the Jerubbaal ostraca, and I think that's the best recent find what we've had that's actually confirmed one aspect of the Bible. Now, here's what it confirms, and here's what it doesn't confirm. It's Jerubbaal was the nickname for Gideon. Okay. And what I like about it is, one, the ostraca dates to the time of the judges. at least as far as, say, the late dating is concerned. It also confirms the existence of the name Jerubbaal, which I think is fantastic. Now, the question is this the same Jerubbaal that refers to Gideon? That's going to be debated, okay? Now, I think it is. I think this is the same Jerubbaal that is Gideon. Now, the reason I think it's Gideon is because it's not a flattering name. It's not a name. It's not a name that you would give your kid if you were a Baal worshiper. Okay? If you were a Baal worshiper, you would never name your kid, let Baal deal with him. I don't think anybody. I mean, it's kind of like the name Nabal. Means fool. No mother named their kid Nabal. That's a name you earn, not be given. So, Jerubbaal is not a name you're given. It's one you earn. So you'd have to do something pretty kind of audacious to get a name like Jerubbaal. So the fact that we find this on an ostraca, is very significant. It's not something we would expect. Not something we would expect at all. So knowing that it's not something that we would expect, and given that it dates to the time of the judges, that's pretty good evidence that there is likely somebody like Gideon kicking around at the time. So even if you don't think that's the real Gideon, having someone around that was like him, that's pretty compelling stuff. That's pretty compelling stuff. Because as I said, that's a nickname. That's when you earn that name. Your mother didn't give you that name. So that's one of the ones I found that has confirmed at least one aspect, that the name Jerubbaal existed. It existed at the time of the judges, and it was probably somebody who was a bit of a rabble-rouser, which Gideon certainly was. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, 1000 Clever Boy, and thank you for sponsoring that question. Marvelous. Samson was not a very good Nazarite, but he was one laugh out loud. Yeah, he was. Not a good one at all. Ooh, very, very not good. Okay, let's see where we are here. Okay, the Camelopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. We celebrated Monday, Thursday with a Pesach Seder with homemade soft matzah. How did you celebrate the holiday? Haven't yet. The fact is that I've been so busy and so exhausted with work. I haven't had the chance to do much cooking at all this week. So it's been really hectic for me. So my current employer has been giving me really late hours, so it's been very, very difficult for me to pull anything off. But I will say this: or when I do celebrate Pesach Seder, I make homemade tortillas. The other unleavened bread.
Much tastier.
And much tastier. It's one of the interesting things is tortillas, as long as it doesn't have any leavening in it, okay, it's just olive oil, water, and flour, you can make a tortilla out of it that is completely kosher and appropriate for Passover. Ooh, I hate hard omelets anyway. So, um, when I worked at a Messianic Jewish congregation, I bounced that off of the rabbi there, and it was like, okay, you eat matzah fine. I'll eat the other tortillas, the other unleavened bread.
And he looked envious.
And he just looked at me for a moment. He goes, "Yeah, I guess it is unleavened bread. Yep, works for Passover." Yeah. Uh, so when we do a Pesach Seder, we use say tortillas instead. Not the ones we buy from the store though. We make them fresh because the ones you buy at the store often have leavening in it. But we'll do homemade tortillas. They taste better. They just taste better than matzah. So, uh, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But we just haven't had the chance to cook yet. So. Careful here not to blow by anything. Okay, 1,000 Clever Boy for $2. Pick a bonbon question. All right.
He wants the one above it on
Okay, let's take this one then. He picked this one. This is the one he says he wants, so we'll do this one here. From Bonbon. How were pharaohs who had visible disabilities like Tutankhamun and Siptah treated by others in court, palace? Did common people ever see what their pharaoh looked like in real life? Yes, they did. As far as the ones with visible disabilities, they still had to pull off feats of prowess. This is one of the things about being king in Egypt. Being king in Egypt wasn't only about wearing the funny hats. You had to have a certain sense of physical prowess. Now, you could achieve that physical prowess several ways, but you had to have it. Now, in the case of King Tut, he would ride chariots and do archery. So he never when he was on, say, parade, he never let those disabilities show. Okay. So, he'd be probably strapped into his chariot. Another person would be driving it, and he'd be just throwing off arrows, hitting targets all over the place. Okay? So, physical prowess was part of the job. You had to be able to do it. In the case of Siptah, we don't really know exactly, how his disability played into this. But we do know in the case of Tutankhamun that there was, we have a lot of scenes of him, riding chariots, doing archery. We do know from his tomb, he had a lot of archery gear. So, he was an avid archer. And his bow showed very good wear. So we do know that he compensated for it in other ways. So the other thing is with how they were treated in the court. We have to understand that Tutankhamun was the last Theban prince. So his role in this, in some ways, he was really protected because there was no other prince after him. He was it. He was the last one. So, common people would have seen him, but they would have done their best to mask his limp, his congenital defects. So they would have done everything they could to mask that, to make it seem as if he was completely able to do the job as a warrior king. So because that was an important factor in the preservation and protection of the food supply. So that was one of the things that was very important in the ritual life of Egypt, is that the king had to show the prowess to be able to protect food from outside invaders. So they would have done their best to hide that. The people might have seen it, but there would have been other compensating factors there. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for your question, and thank you to Bonbon to 1000 Clever Boy for sponsoring that question. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Daniel Ray. Not the Mount Ebel curse tablet? No. Not yet, anyway. Oh, I saw the epigraphy on that. So bad. So bad. Oh my gosh, it's so awful. Some of the worst epigraphy I've ever seen. I mean, some of the worst epigraphy. I mean, Doug Petrovich level of epigraphy. I mean, that kind of bad. Terrible, terrible. Maybe even worse. Galil's epigraphy of that was even worse than Petrovich's, which is saying something. That's just, ugh. Okay. And another another Bonbon question from 1000 Clever Boy for $2. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. You're really into these Bonbon questions tonight, aren't you? Well, you want to above it. All right, the producer here has put in her request as well. So where's the one on the marriage here? I can find it here. Looking for it here. Yeah, how did Ankh Cinnamon feel about Tutankhamun? Okay, there we go. All right. So this has been requested by my producer. How did Ankh Cinnamon feel about Tutankhamun? More generally, did the great royal wives of pharaohs have any feelings towards their husband, or were they purely political marriages for power? Tough to say. Now, the great royal wife, and there was only one, okay, the great queen. Kings had many wives, okay? Kings of Egypt particularly had lots of wives. Now, the way marriage typically worked in Egypt was your typical prince, even the crown prince, was only allowed one wife. Only allowed one wife until he became king. And once he became king, he could then gather for himself a lot of wives. Some of those wives would be internal to Egypt, some of them would be from outside. The ones internal to Egypt would have been, say, the daughters of hereditary princes, regional governors, charming daughters of viziers, that sort of thing. The ones from the outside would have been the result of exchange of wives as a result of signing treaties. Okay, so treaty wives. Now, as far as we can tell, Tutankhamun only had one wife. The fact is, he didn't get quite to the stage where he could sign those treaties and make the exchange of wives. So Ankh-Sunamun was the only wife he had. So she was by definition the Great Queen. Now, how did she feel about him is an open question. We do know how she felt about who she was being forced to marry after his death. She was being forced to marry Ai, who was Tutankhamun's vizier. And she did not like that arrangement at all. She found Ai to be old and gross. So she was not happy about that. And this is what sort of sparked off the war between the Hittites and the Egyptians. Was Ankh-Sunamun sent a letter to the Hittites asking a Hittite prince to be sent, preferably someone young and attractive, and he would marry her and become king over Egypt. I got wind of that and sent Horemheb out to kill that prince. And that started the 50-year war between the Hittites and the Egyptians. So, she obviously felt a whole lot better about marrying her half-brother. And that's who, the relationship between Ankh-Sunamun and Tutankhamun was half-brother, half-sister. Okay? So they were related. They were blood-related. It is one of the rare instances we do find of consanguineous marriage in Egypt. But she does seem to have been a lot happier with Tut than she was with Tut's courtiers. So it's hard to say exactly how she felt about him, but she seemed to have a much better, higher regard for him than his lackeys. Okay? But we don't have a lot of writings from the royal wives. So we don't know exactly how most of them felt about their husbands. These were, a lot of these were political marriages. A lot of them were political marriages. So we do have to keep that in perspective too, that we are dealing here with a lot of political marriages and the results of those political marriages. So, in some cases, they would have been fine with this. Other cases, they wouldn't have. So it's going to depend, but we don't know for sure. Because this was a matter of expediency as much as and political power as much as anything else. And one thing we do know about a lot of these queens were they were realistic about this. We do understand that they were realistic about this. They weren't idealists. This was the part of their world. This was part of their culture. This is something they expected to happen. So, that's just something that we have just got to realize that, the idea of, say, young love, not so common back then. But, as I said, in the case of Ankh-Sunamun, we have some idea of what she felt because of what she said about about Tut's courtiers. Okay. So in some ways, she's an exception to the queens of Egypt because we got an opinion from her.
Bob's comment, gathering wives.
Yeah, gathering wives like Pokemon. Yeah, that's not far from the truth. Not far from the truth. Let's see, yeah. But the more treaties a king would sign, the more wives he'd gather, the more power he would have, the more trading opportunities, the more wealth, and potentially more children to succeed him. So this line of succession would be assured. So,
we do have writings of
yeah, we do have the writings of Chinese court wives, but not of Egyptians.
Yeah, but you get an idea from the wives. It's pretty cold-blooded, backstabbing.
Oh yeah, it's no fun being in a harem. There's no fun being in a harem, and a lot of conniving, a lot of devious schemes. The court wives were not the royal wives wasn't a one big happy family. Wasn't one big happy family. They were trying to do each other in too. Now, of course, the great wife is in a pretty special position. She gets special facilities. She gets special people attending to her. She's treated with. Yeah, her son's going to be king. Her son's going to be king. And in the case of Tutankhamun and Ankh-Sunamun's child will be king if any of them had survived, which they didn't, unfortunately, for her. But yeah, that was just part of it. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciated. And thank you for 1,000 Clever Boy for sponsoring that question. So, okay. So we're at the end of the Super Chats here, I think. Yep, we're at the end here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple more questions and then call it a night because I'd like to go to bed. I'm strange about that. So I'll take a couple more and then we're going to call it a night. Okay? So with that said, here. Okay. I'm going to take this one here from Matthew D. Race, and he asks, what are your thoughts about the Philistines in Genesis? Folks look at it as anachronistic, but I had read a theory suggesting the word might have been like a title applied from the outside. Okay. The earliest reference we have to Philistines is actually in at least the tribes of Philistines. Now we have to understand that Philistines it's a catch bucket term. It's a catch bucket term. It's basically the catch bucket term that the Israelites used to refer to what's called the Sea Peoples, which is the various tribes of Indo-Europeans that travel down from Anatolia onto the coastal plain of Palestine. And there are various tribes. There's not just one. The Danu, the Luca, the Peliset, which was where Philistines get their name from. And these are all various tribes of basically the Sea Peoples. Okay? The earliest reference we have to a tribe of the Sea People is actually found in the Amarna letters. And these date to roughly 14... I think, what is it? Sorry, not 14. 1340s. The 1340s. Sorry, not 1340s. 1440s? Let's quickly check this. Quickly. Get my centuries wrong here. Yeah, it was the 1340s. Okay. So the 1340s. Okay. So that's when we get our first glimpse of the Sea Peoples, and they're at that point they're just starting to encroach. They're making their first forays into the coastal plain. Okay, so prior to that point, we really don't have Philistines in Canaan. Now, with that said, by the time of Ramses II, they are entrenched. So that takes place very, very quickly. It doesn't take them very long to get entrenched in Palestine. That doesn't take long at all. Less than a century, they've got a firm hold there. And with that said, when we look at, say, Genesis and the what we're seeing in the book of Genesis here is what's called retrojection. Okay, Genesis is being written for an audience that was alive in the 1260s or later. Okay. So you're talking, the target of this audience is to a group of people where they're already Philistines or Peliset or the Luca or those tribes already in the coastal plain. So, knowing that, the writer of Genesis is going to orient their vocabulary to people who are already familiar with some of these tribal groups who are in, say, Canaan. Okay, so this isn't so much that that the book is suggesting that this is not a true anachronism, but it is a retrojection. It's basically saying, okay, you're going to go into this land, and you're going to encounter these people, and today you're going to find Philistines there. So it's not meant to be an anachronism, but it is meant to be something that is written towards the specific time period to the audience it was being sent to, which would have been Israelites, as I said, in that 13th century. So, that's what, but we do find a lot of retrojective terms in Genesis. So this isn't the only retrojective term in Genesis by a long shot. You have ones like Pharaoh and the land of Ramses or other retrojective terms. So it isn't the only one, not by SSA, not by a long shot. It is, though, a piece of literature that is written for its specific time. So that's what my thoughts are as far as the reference of Philistines in Genesis. Is really a retrojective term of how the land is like today, and then being sort of referenced back in time. So, anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay. One more super chat here. From Jose de Coria for $2. Thank you very much. Super chat. Where do you believe Sodom and Gomorrah are? Ooh. Okay. I believe that Sodom and Gomorrah, and I don't think we've found it yet. I think it is in south of the Dead Sea and on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. So, on the eastern side in Jordan, on the southern end. So, how did I come to that conclusion? Which is the geography of the war kings. Okay. Now, the war takes place. They're over in Gaza. They're over in Gaza. That's where they sort of camp out. They camp out in Gaza, and then they attack Sodom. Now, to do that, they more or less cut across the Negev and attack it from the south. And we know they flee, and they flee into the tar pits. Now, those tar pits, we know where they are today. They're still finding bitumen there, but it's sort of if you take the north part of the Dead Sea and the south part of the Dead Sea, and you create a little triangle into Jordan, those tar pits are kind of at that tip of the triangle. So for that, they're having to do that retreat, and they're retreating up into that tar pit area of Jordan. Now, if it had been located in the north, you would have some really odd issues. Such as they would have to go all the way up, cross at the fords of the Jordan, and then come back down. It's a really arduous trip to make. You don't want to take an army across there. Not if you're actually going back up. It also makes, say, the route by Abraham very odd and difficult, because they will have to apprehend the armies up in basically Syria at that point. So, I don't think they're making that trip from Hebron and going all the way up to Syria to apprehend the army. That would make no sense. It'd make a lot more sense if they do that route. They sack Sodom and Gomorrah, at the southern tip of the Dead Sea, and then come back up through the Judean foothills. That makes a lot more sense, and makes sense of Abraham's ambush from Hebron. So the Jordan's just really very difficult to pass. It's not an easy river to cross. This is not an easy river to cross at all. So you would definitely it would definitely make a lot more sense if Sodom and Gomorrah were on the south of the Dead Sea than it would in the north. So that's sort of my reasoning for this. Is that launch of the attack from Gaza really only makes sense to drive the people back in the tar pits if you come from the south. And encounter it at the south. It makes a whole lot of sense if it's north. So I don't agree with Steve Collins Sodom at Tel El Haman. I think that site's so plagued with problems it's not even funny. I don't think it's a good match. But anyway, that's sort of my view on this, is that it's if you take the geography of that War of Kings very seriously, then you don't have a lot of alternatives other than a southern Sodom. So that's where I think it is. I hope that helped. That's the reasoning why I think it's where it is. We haven't discovered it yet. Hope we do someday. It'd be nice if we did. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking on this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Let's see here. I'm going to take one more non-super chat. I'll probably call it a night after this, because I would like to get to bed early for a change. It's been a very, very long week and a very exhausting one. So anyway, I do like this one here. I think I'll take this one here from Silly PB here. And she asks, is the pottery dating of the walls of Jericho finding legit? Yes, it is legit. It was discarded in the 50s by a woman archaeology. Okay, you're talking here about Kathleen Kenyon. Okay, now, it depends on what you mean by the pottery dating. Okay, now, who's pottery dating? Kenyon's pottery dating is legit. Okay? Now, the sort of redating that was done by Bryant Wood, not legit. No archaeologist is going to take that seriously. So it depends on what you mean by is the pottery dating of the walls of Jericho legit. Those walls of the Middle Bronze fortifications do date to, say, 1550 BC. And I think that's really where the archaeology stands. Now, there are later pot shards that have been found. Basically, some late bronze pot shards. Kenyon didn't know exactly how to deal with those, so she didn't discard them. But she also didn't properly account for them either, because she didn't find anything above the Middle Bronze fortifications. Today, we do know that, but we do know that there was another wall above that, which was a set of mud brick walls, and this was done by Lorenzo Nigro's excavations in 2019. So that has now been accounted for. So we do know that the Middle Bronze walls, the ones that were dated by Kenyon, are 1550. And we do have another Late Bronze 1 or Late Bronze 2 walls, at least Late Bronze 1, that dates to roughly 1400 to about 1200 BC. So there's another set of walls there that were mud brick, and those Late Bronze pot shards are definitely accounted for. So I hope that sort of straightens it out. I wouldn't buy, say, for example, the whole myth that they were discarded. They weren't discarded. They just weren't accounted for in that way. But at the same time, too, those late bronze pot shards don't redate the earlier middle bronze pot shards. And that's, I think, what the distortion that guys like Bryant Wood are doing. Is they're trying to take those later Bronze Age pot shards and trying to redate the middle Bronze pot shards to the late Bronze 1 period. And I don't think you can do that. I don't think that's not good methodology. In fact, that stinks, really. So again, we have to be careful here and be pretty precise in which pot shards we're talking about. We also have to understand too that a lot of those later pot shards were not found in context either. They were found in fill. And whenever you can find something in fill, you have to be really careful about how you date that. Because you don't know when you're examining fill. And fill is basically somebody in the ancient past dug a trench and then put garbage in it. And now you're sifting through the garbage. You don't know exactly when that trench was dug and when it was filled with garbage. So when you take the garbage out, you can't be exactly sure that it dates to the rest of the site. So a lot of those pot shards, the later pot shards, were found in fill. So we have to be
pretty certain it's genuine.
We were certain it's genuine. We just have to be careful how we date it. And we can't just say, "Oh, we found a Coke can in the same strata as a Neolithic blade. Oh, we're still making Stone Age blades in the 1950s." Dating doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. So, again, we have to be careful. And I think a lot of this sloppy redating by Bryant Wood has been very irresponsible, and nobody accepts it. Nobody in the field accepts it. So this is something that's really only sort of touted by ABR, Associates for Biblical Research. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question, and that will be our last non-super chat for the night, except we got another Bonbon question.
Sponsored Bonbon.
Another sponsored Bonbon question. Look at that.
He's got one that he's
Okay, another Bonbon question. Okay, which one is this?
There's an interesting one under the camel. Bonbon asks, how genuine would you say the piety movement in the sense of how much was by the priest and the people after taking out their frustration? That's several.
Okay, well, let's see if I can find it here.
So it's kind of midway up after the whole, take a left at the Great Sea.
Okay, I found the Reed Sea. I found the pyramids. Days after? Okay, I see it. Okay. So, thank you to Jack Ray for sponsoring another Bonbon question. And Bonbon, here's your question. How genuine would you say that the piety movement was after the Amarna period, in the sense of how much was it driven by the priesthood and the people just taking out their frustration of the previous rule? I think it was quite genuine. I don't think it was so much driven by the priesthood, although certainly they contributed to it. But I think after the Amarna period, there was a legitimate attempt to get back to the native religion, to basically the polytheistic system of Egypt. And we do see this in tombs, okay, all across the board. We do see that transition pre-Amarna to post-Amarna, where pre-Amarna, you had a lot of, say, domestic life scenes, after Amarna, you see a lot of religious scenes. Okay, so I don't think they were taking out the frustration on the previous rule. The fact is that the Amarna period didn't die quickly. It sort of just tapered off. Here's one of the things we kind of have to understand about the Amarna rule that I don't think a lot of people get is that, okay, Tutankhamun abandons Amarna in his third regnal year. Okay, so he leaves Amarna, and the whole city's abandoned at that point because the city's rubbish. It's a terrible city, terrible place to put a city. Lots of famine, pestilence, that sort of thing. Just not a good place to put a city. Okay, but it's sort of just the ruins there just sort of fall apart. We find Amarna blocks from there over at Hermopolis across the river. So they're starting to take blocks from there. We do see some graffiti, like faces of Semites being chiseled out. But we also see that some of those Amarna temples had their blocks taken apart and reused during the reign of Seti I to build, say, more monuments to Amun-Re. We do know that the Atenism as a religion was not outlawed. It was not outlawed. But after the Amarna period, during the reign of Tutankhamun, all the funding was pulled. So without funding, your influence as a cult diminishes radically. So they didn't have the funds to feed priests, to do offerings and sacrifices. And without that funding, your cult dwindles pretty fast. So they were more choked out economically than they were banned. And there wasn't so much, how do I say, defacing. They didn't so much deface Akhenaten's temple or statuary as they did pillage it. They recycled it. They recycled it. So, because they recycled it, that's really one of the reasons why we have actually a fair amount of the walls of the temple is because Akhenaten's temple was taken apart and reused in other temples. So, and it was often used for fill. There's again, we like in a pylon. You know, in a pylon, you have the exterior stones, but in between those stones, they would put in fill. And many of this fill was the stones from these Amarna temples. So, like we see this, like for example, a lot of the pylons that they rebuilt at Karnak, they would move away all the stones and then find all these filled with inscriptions on it. You know, some Middle Kingdom, some Amarna period stuff, but basically temples that had been either abandoned or, you know, destroyed for the purposes of this fill. So I do think that the piety movement post-Amarna was genuine. I mean, it's definitely genuine because you just see it all across social classes. It's not just from the royalty down. It's all across the board. So, and they're not specifically taking it out on the previous rule. In fact, it won't actually be until the 19th dynasty, where really the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th dynasty, with the reign of Horemheb, that the Egyptians get that sense that the Amarna rule was not so good. Because after Tutankhamun, you have King Ai. Okay? And he reigns for 4 years. And he's more or less continuing Theban policies. Theban policies, Theban corruption. He's part of that corrupt system. But when we get back to Horemheb rule, he's gonna see how corrupt that system is, and he's gonna try to put a stop to it. And it's at that point that the Amarna period starts getting really rubbished, because Horemheb is cracking down on all those Amarna sycophants, all those corrupt officials. And then when you get after his reign into the Ramessides, they're really against the Thebans at that point. So it's only at that point where you start seeing the Amarna period, really not looking so good in the eyes of, say, the ruling class. But it takes some time. The last 7 years of Tut's reign, the 4 years of Ai's reign, and into the reign of Horemheb is when you start. That's when you start seeing the Amarna period really start to get rubbished. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Want to thank who sponsored this one? Thank was it Jack Ray for sponsoring this one. Thank you very much for the super chat, and very much appreciate it, and thank you very much for the question. Okay. Oh dear, that's going to be difficult to do. All right. Okay, 10:43. I have timestamps, so. But letting me know that to mark it helps. All right, so again, thank you very much for sponsoring that bonbon question, Jack. Really appreciate it. Okay. Jose de Correa for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Last, is there evidence for the plagues of Egypt? Sort of. Now, when we talk about the plagues of Egypt, most of these are agricultural plagues. They're going to affect crops for one season. And then you're not going to see, this next agricultural season is going to roll around and you're not going to see anything ever happened. That's just typical of agricultural plagues. Agricultural plagues don't leave long-term evidence. You get a blight on your wheat, well, next year you'll have a full crop. You'll see no evidence of that. People starve, well, famines hit all the time. Again, next year will roll around and people will be fed again. So you're not going to see a whole lot of evidence. Now, there is one piece of evidence that does seem to have lasted beyond the plagues, which is the destruction of the trees. And that's because trees don't recover easily. It's at that point, there's one point where it says that the locusts stripped off all the bark of the trees and essentially killed the trees. Now, the thing with trees is once you lose trees, they don't come back for 50, 100, 200 years, if ever. Sometimes the denuded landscape never recovers. And this is probably the only plague that would leave a long-term effect. Now, we do see the amount of wood being used in ritual furniture start to diminish at the end of Dynasty 19. And it's starting into the reign of Dynasties 20 and 21, where we start seeing furniture being recycled because of lack of wood. So there is that evidence. And Egypt is having to import wood, even scrub species that he has to import. So it's no longer in a place where it can make its own furniture. It has to import cedars, has to, go to Sinai to get acacia and various olive woods. So it's at a state where it can no longer support its funerary industry. And that's, again, because of the shortage of wood that happened at the end of Dynasty 19 into Dynasty 20. So that's probably the only... the after the bark strip, they'd have the logs. They could log what was still standing, but they're not growing back, essentially. So they'll have a surplus of wood for a little while they cut down what's still there. I mean, same as when, say, a fire travels through a forest. You know, you can send loggers in and they'll just chop down all the wood that's still standing, log out the area, and then hopefully it'll grow back someday. But, you know, that won't get rid of the wood entirely. So that's probably the only plague that would have stayed. So that's probably the only evidence that we have of the plagues of Egypt. But again, that's mostly because most of these were short-term agricultural plagues that, you know, didn't last long. You know, things such as frogs wouldn't last long. Hail wouldn't last long. Darkness not last long. So we wouldn't expect these plagues to have long-term effects for the most part. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Jack Ray for $5. I'll see that last and raise it. Okay. 10:43. I'll find my timestamp here. Is this the childless one?
Yeah.
All right. So here's another one here from Bonbon. Thank you, Jack Ray, for sponsoring this question. You guys aren't going to let me go to bed early tonight, are you? Bonbon asks, was childlessness more common as the New Kingdom progressed? I see in the late 18th dynasty several pharaohs royalty with no kids, and even the last pharaoh, the military general, also had no kids. We're not really sure why. Okay. I don't think it was necessarily more common, but it does seem to have been a problem in the late New Kingdom. Now, there were times when royal families had lots of kids running around. The beginning of, say, Dynasty 19, had a big family. Okay. When Ramses I came to the throne after Horemheb. Now, there was a succession crisis at the end of Dynasty 18. You had Akhenaten. Okay. He has many treaty wives, but he only has 2 eligible sons. And he had a ton of daughters. Now, he had like 6 daughters. 6 daughters and like 2 sons. The first son, Smenkhare, had no children. Okay. So you got your first succession crisis. So no children after the death of Smenkhare. Then you had King Tut. No children after King Tut. Then you had King Ai. Now, Ai actually had a son. He had a son. But his son dies during his reign. So during that 4 years he's king, his only son dies. Oops. Was this assassination? Was this somebody getting even? Who knows? So, Ai's son dies. Horemheb comes to the throne. No children either. Okay? We don't know why. But he has no children. So you get 4 kings in a row with no sons to succeed them. Either through accident, death, or infertility. We don't know why. But he then, after him, appoints his good friend Ramses I to the throne. Now, Ramses I, when he takes the throne, is already a grandfather. He's got a quiver full of arrows. Okay? At the time when Ramses I comes to the throne, Ramses II was already born. He was 2 years old. So the line of succession is very, very clear at this point. So there's a ready line of succession. And by the time Ramses II comes to the throne, him and his wife are already producing children. So, and ultimately, Ramses II will have 120 children. So they take care of that succession problem pretty handily, yeah. Okay? So some of this childlessness probably had to do with some inbreeding. There was probably inbreeding that was responsible for some of this. And the problem here with the inbreeding was in ancient Egyptian medicine, inbreeding was often amongst royals was seen as the cure for childlessness. It just made it worse, not better. So, Egyptian medicine wasn't perfect, but it was seen as a form of magic. Hey, royal blood is magical. You have two royals paired together, it's gotta be extra magical. Not so much. That half-brother, half-sister thing probably did more to contribute to their childlessness than anything. Yeah, it didn't do great for the royals in Europe either. It never does to anyone any good.
And some good peasant stock and
yeah, mix in some good peasant stock and you're better off. But we do know that King Tut had 2 children. There are 2 child coffins with child skeletons in his tomb. So 2 of Tut's children were buried with him. One appears to be stillborn. The other one did not seem to make it past 2 months. So there were children. King Tut did produce children with Ankh-Sunamun, but they just didn't survive him. And that was probably, again, because of the inbreeding. So that probably has more to do with the succession crisis than anything else. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Thank you to Jack Ray for sponsoring that question. I got a couple more super chats. No bed for you. All right, we got a super chat here from VLN for 220 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do we know Bathsheba's birthplace? She was probably born in Judea. Whereabouts? We don't know. But that's probably where she was born. Because of her occupancy there. She was married to Uriah the Hittite. And he does seem to have been part of that community. So they are seemingly following Israelite law and custom while there. So while her husband Uriah was a foreigner, she probably wasn't. But again, not exactly sure of where she's born. We're not given a lot of details about her biography. But that's a guess. Okay, we're guessing that she was born in Judea, in all likelihood. But Judea is also a big place, so we're not exactly sure of what her birthplace was. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Jack ready for 556. I figure I'd give it another shot. How many bonbon questions are we going to take tonight?
we might actually be
out. Do we have any more bonbon questions? I don't know if we have any more bonbon questions. Maybe we'll go to the top here, see if there's one. Okay, I'll take this. Okay, I got one here. I'll take this one. This is a bonbon question. Is it true that the Egyptians were terrible sailors and were bad when it came to fighting on the seas? If so, why didn't Egyptian enemies during the New Kingdom try to attack on the waters to gain an advantage? Okay. They weren't terrible sailors. Far from it, in fact. They were actually fairly good sailors. We do have a lot of documentation of their seaports. They did trade across the Mediterranean by sea. So they were able to move ships in and out of the Nile Delta into the Mediterranean. They did have some naval warships. So we do know that they had that. We have know this from the model boats that they left. For example, there's a couple model boats in the Egyptian Museum that have little figurines of soldiers on top of siege towers, on top of boats. Okay, those would be like elevated archery platforms. Okay, so they were good. They were actually fairly good at fighting on the seas. They also did trading missions in the Gulf of Suez, in the Red Sea, all the way down to Africa, and they would actually take the sea route to get there. So they would essentially go down to Sudan, make the trades, and come back up, and then they had a port there on the Gulf of Suez that they then took the goods overland. So that's sort of the route that they took. So they were actually quite adept at navigating by sea. We also have evidence, like, for example, the Tale of Wenamun, where they went on a expedition to Tyre to buy cedars for the Temple of Amun-Re. We also have the Shipwrecked Sailor, which is also, a tale of a sailor who gets shipwrecked on an island. So we do know that they did go to sea. We do know that they were very good at it. They were actually quite adept at nautical travel. They actually had a fair number of boats. We also have to remember, too, that Egypt itself was a river nation. It was a river culture. Goods were moved up and down the Nile primarily by boat, not by road. In fact, the wheel wasn't even introduced in Egypt until the Second Intermediate Period. So before then, all travel up and down Egypt was by boat. So they were excellent sailors. So, the reason they didn't attack their hegemonic territories by boat was it really wasn't that practical for what they wanted to accomplish. Now, they would supply some of their armies by boat. That happened. Especially when they could reach Byblos. They would often travel by boat to Byblos. But armies had to go over land because they're driving chariots. They're taking horses and all that, and they're essentially, it's easier for them to take a chariot army up the coastal plain than it is to take it by boat, just because of the mass numbers involved. So it was more of a practical matter of moving people and supplies around than it was to attack by boat. It didn't make a lot of sense for them to attack by boat, because they're just going to have to do it by siege, by a land siege anyway. And most of their hegemony were inland. So it just didn't make a lot of sense to attack by boat in most cases. It's not to say they couldn't. It's not to say they didn't have those facilities. They had some. It just didn't make a lot of sense to do it most of the time. just because their hegemony was in Palestine and in Nubia. So it made a lot more sense to travel over land for those particular items, or those particular holdings. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Thanks to Jack Ray again for sponsoring another super chat, another bonbon question.
And there's one more.
One more. Okay. Jose de Correa for $2. Thank you very much. They're making this a game.
Yes, I put my foot down. This is the last one. Right above it.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to make this the last question of the night. So, thank you very much for the super chats, but I am tired and I do have to get to bed because I do have to work tomorrow. So, let's see here. One more bonbon question. All right, let's see what we got here.
Do you agree with James Shores?
Okay, let's see here. So the question here from Bonbon is, do you agree with Chaim Shore's computer analysis that the Book of Genesis was written by one person? What are your thoughts about using things like AI for biblical exegesis and study? I think it's evidence. Okay. Now, I haven't looked at his computer analysis, so I don't know exactly what to make of it. But computers have been used for answering questions on linguistics and even authorship for a long time. This is not a new technology. This has been used since the 1960s. Now, granted, in the 1960s, they were doing this with punch cards. Oh, boy, I'm glad those days are gone. Yeah. Doing things with punch cards, not fun. Especially if you drop them all. Well, yeah, it made pretty good confetti. I will admit that. But it's been used. It's been used for these purposes since the 1960s. Okay. So I'd like to see more of the work. Honestly, I think you could use this is a proper application for AI. It's a proper application, especially if it's done with the right tools and frameworks. I use computers for chronology. It's very handy for that. It's exceptionally handy for chronology. Things where you have to do a lot of calculations very, very fast. It's excellent.
All depends upon the intelligence and understanding
Yeah.
of the program.
It does depend a lot on the intelligence and the understanding of the programmer. Now, with AI, we also have to keep in account too that a badly formulated question to AI will give you a badly formulated result. So you might have to do a lot more input and preparation to get an AI to do this well. It's not something like, you can't just give a question like, oh, is the Book of Genesis written by one person? That's not going to work for AI. You're going to have to give it a lot of instruction to make it do what you need it to do. And that's fine. I mean, if you lay down the foundation and the footwork to prepare an AI in that way, AI might be an appropriate tool for doing this. I'm certainly not opposed to it.
If the AI is farmed by a documentary hypothesis who tells the programming, you have to consider.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust ChatGPT for this.
Yeah.
The problem with ChatGPT is it's taking a small question and consulting a lot of common knowledge. Common knowledge and, add populum thinking and argumentation by authority. So that's the problem with ChatGPT is its tool set isn't there.
Still, if it's being programmed by an atheist who doesn't believe in Genesis and all they program in is counter material, and they don't program in anything by fire or
well, that's what I just said. At basically popularity, And that's the problem with like ChatGPT is it's going to take the common knowledge. And common knowledge can be very, very wrong. So, I don't have a problem with the result here, Shore's analysis. I just haven't seen his work. I'd like to check his work before I back it. But it could be done, and it has been done like this for a long time. So this is not new. This is not by any means new. So anyway, that's going to be the last bonbon question of the night. Okay. Because we've already said that was going to be the last one. But I do see one more super chat here from Jack Ray. And thank you very much, Jack, for that super chat. I know you want one more. We already said that was going to be the last, okay? So we do appreciate the super chat. We do appreciate the support. Thank you so much for your generosity all night. It's been amazing. It's just for the laugh out louds. Where did he say that? Oh, I see that. Okay. It's just for the laugh out louds. You're trying to kill me!
Jose's comment, you have a week to
See, did I see that? Yeah.
gaming strategy. 86-hour live stream could be.
No!
You can put up.
Thank you for the super chat for $2. Maybe 6-hour live stream. Could be. Laugh out loud. No. No. Jose says, Bonbon, you have a week to make more for next week. Oh, Brick Creation showed up at the last minute. I'm really late. Well, you are a little. We're ending it here. 1,000 Clever Boy. It's only 2 more hours. Yeah, that's the problem. I can't go 2 more hours. Okay. We're going to wrap it up here. So, anyway, no sleep is much worse. Yes, it is. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight. We had some really great questions here. Really great questions. So this has been a real pleasure to answer those questions. I want to thank all our generous Super Chat supporters who keep food on our table and to keep the questions rolling. So thank you so much for the support of the channel. Also want to thank our Patreon supporters who who've basically fund our equipment upgrades, which we're going to be probably doing a few in the not too distant future here. Also want to thank our regular subscribers, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and remember to hit the bell notification. Also want to thank everyone who just leaves a comment. That does tell the algorithm to spread these videos far and wide, and we very, very much appreciate that. And with that said, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Have a great Easter weekend. And I will catch you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.